Before this story tears you apart and puts you back together, hit that like button right now and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Now stay with me, because what happens in the next 6 minutes will change everything you thought you knew about loyalty, betrayal, and the price of walking away from the wrong person at the wrong time. The flowers were white. 300 of them, arranged in cascading arches that framed the entrance to the Meridian Grand Ballroom like the gates of something sacred. White roses, white lilies, white orchids, all of it chosen by Vanessa Hale herself, because Vanessa Hale chose everything, down to the thread count of the napkins folded into swans on tables that cost more per seat than most people made in a month. The chandeliers overhead held 6,000 individual crystals. Someone had counted. Someone on Vanessa's staff had actually stood beneath them and counted, because that was the kind of woman she was. A woman who needed the numbers confirmed, the details verified, the world arranged exactly as she had imagined it, and not 1 degree off. 412 guests filled the ballroom: judges, politicians, 2 sitting senators who had flown in from the Capitol on private aircraft, 3 men in the back row who wore their expensive suits the way armor is worn, like something you need rather than something you want. They sat with their hands folded in their laps and their eyes moving slowly across the room, cataloging exits, assessing threats, doing what men in their position always did even at a wedding, maybe especially at a wedding, because in their world, celebrations were where people let their guard down, and letting your guard down was how you ended up in the ground. Damien Moretti stood at the altar. He was 41 years old, and he looked like someone had taken the concept of control and given it a human body. 6 feet 2 inches of contained, deliberate stillness. Dark hair swept back from a face that had once been described by a journalist, before that journalist abruptly retired from investigative reporting, as the face of a man who has never once been surprised by anything. His jaw was sharp enough to cut glass. His suit was charcoal gray, bespoke, fitted so precisely it seemed less like clothing and more like a second skin he had been born with. His hands hung at his sides, perfectly still. Not nervous. Damien Moretti did not do nervous. He did calculated. He did composed. He did the particular brand of absolute stillness that came from 2 decades of making decisions that could end lives and then sleeping soundly afterward. He was looking at the back of the ballroom where the doors were still closed, where Vanessa was still being photographed in the antechamber, where in approximately 4 minutes the music would shift from soft strings to something more ceremonial, and 412 people would rise to their feet and watch the most politically connected woman in the city walk toward the most feared man in it, and the whole thing would be over in under 20 minutes. That had been the plan. Damien exhaled slowly through his nose. Beside him, his best man, Marco Rinaldi, shifted almost imperceptibly, a micro-movement of the shoulder that anyone else would have missed, but that Damien read the way other men read print. "Relax," Damien said, barely moving his lips. "I am relaxed," Marco said, in the tone of a man who was not remotely relaxed. "You're not. The Bologna family has 3 guys on the east balcony. I know." "You knew before we walked in?" "I knew before we landed this morning." Marco said nothing for a moment, then quietly, "You're getting married, not going to war." "Those 2 things," Damien said, "have never been mutually exclusive." The string quartet shifted into something softer, a transition piece, the musical equivalent of clearing a throat. Damien felt the room settle around him. 412 people breathing together, rustling, adjusting, a collective inhale before the moment everyone had assembled to witness. His jaw tightened slightly. He was not afraid of marriage. He had been married before. He knew what it cost and what it meant and what it eventually became when it broke apart. And he had already done a precise and unsentimental calculation of what this particular marriage would cost him against what it would earn him, and the numbers had come out in favor of proceeding, so he was proceeding. That was how he made every decision: numbers, calculations, the elimination of sentiment from the equation. He had been very good at eliminating sentiment since Elena. He did not think her name often. He had worked very deliberately at that particular discipline, the same discipline he applied to everything else. And he had become exceptionally skilled at routing his thoughts around the territory of Elena Cross, the way a highway routes around a collapsed bridge. The route was longer, but the bridge would kill you if you tried to cross it, so you didn't. The doors at the back of the ballroom opened, not the main doors, Not the grand double doors through which Vanessa would enter in 4 minutes, flanked by her father and her personal photographer and the minor cloud of perfectionism she carried everywhere like weather. The side door, the narrow service door set into the wall to the left, the one that the catering staff used, the one that no guest had any business entering through. A child walked in. She was small. She could not have been more than 6 years old, maybe 6.5, with dark hair that fell in loose, slightly tangled waves past her shoulders, as though someone had brushed it carefully this morning, but she had run through wind to get here. She wore a pale blue dress, simple, not the kind of dress you'd wear to an event like this, the kind of dress you'd wear to a school picture day or a Sunday afternoon visit somewhere. On her feet were white shoes with a small buckle on the strap. In her arms, clutched tight against her chest with both hands, was a stuffed rabbit. Old, worn at the ears. One of the button eyes was slightly off-center, giving it an expression of lopsided worry. She walked down the side of the ballroom. Nobody stopped her immediately. For a long, suspended second, nobody did anything at all, because the sight of a small child at a formal event tends to trigger a particular human response. The assumption that someone knows where she belongs. The assumption that she is with someone. The assumption that the situation is under control. 412 people made that assumption for approximately 5 seconds. Then she reached the aisle. She turned left and walked up the center of it. The murmur started from the back and rolled forward like a wave, heads turning, necks craning, a 400-voice ripple of confusion spreading through the room. The string quartet faltered, the cellist's bow skipping a half beat before they straggled to a stop. The woman in the second row, one of Vanessa's aunts, draped in pale gold, said, "What on earth?" loud enough that the senator beside her turned to look. The little girl did not stop. She walked the full length of the aisle with the unhurried, absolute certainty of someone who knew exactly where she was going and had already decided that nothing would prevent her from getting there. Her white shoes were quiet on the carpet runner. Her dark hair moved slightly with each step. Her arms held the worn rabbit tighter. She stopped at the altar. She looked up at Damien Moretti. He looked down at her. And in the 4 seconds that followed, something happened in Damien Moretti's face that no one in that room had ever seen before, and that several of them would spend the rest of their lives trying to accurately describe. It was not recognition, exactly. It was something older and more unsettling than recognition. The expression of a man confronting a shape that shouldn't exist. A face that his nervous system was registering before his conscious mind had caught up, like seeing a ghost. Not because you believe in ghosts, but because the ghost is standing right there, and your body has already understood something your brain has not yet processed. The little girl tilted her head. She said, in a voice that was entirely calm, entirely certain, entirely heartbreaking in its simplicity, "Daddy, why didn't you come home?" The silence that followed was the loudest thing Damien Moretti had ever heard. He was aware of 412 people ceasing to breathe simultaneously. He was aware of Marco taking a single step backward, not in retreat, but in the instinctive way a man steps back from something he does not understand. He was aware of the chandeliers above, their 6,000 crystals throwing fractured light across the white flowers and the white napkins and the pale blue dress of the child standing in front of him. He was aware, with a precision that surprised even him, of the stuffed rabbit, the worn ears, the off-center eye, the way she held it. "I don't," he started. His voice came out wrong, not loud enough, not controlled enough. He stopped. The main doors opened. Vanessa Hale stood framed in the entrance, backlit by the afternoon light from the lobby. Her dress a sweep of ivory silk that cost more than most cars, her dark hair pinned with pearl-tipped pins, her expression, carefully composed until this exact moment, shifting with rapid, dangerous precision as she took in the scene at the altar. She was not a stupid woman. She read situations fast. What she read now brought a flush of color up her throat and into her cheeks, a hot, humiliated red that her foundation was not quite thick enough to conceal from the front rows. She came down the aisle at a pace that was not quite a walk and not quite a march. The silk of her dress hissing against the runner, her father trailing in her wake like a man who had already made peace with not understanding what was happening. She stopped when she reached the altar. She looked at the child. Then she looked at Damien. "What is this?" Her voice was pitched low, controlled, but with something brittle underneath it. The sound of a woman holding something together through sheer force of will and doing it in front of 412 witnesses. I don't know, Damien said. You don't know. I don't know her. She just called you Daddy. I heard what she said. The little girl had not moved. She was still looking up at Damien with those dark eyes. And this was the thing that was doing something to him, something he had no framework for, because her eyes were a specific shade of dark brown with a small, particular fleck of amber in the left iris. And that was not a common combination. And the last time he had seen that combination, it had been in a mirror, and then, years before that, it had been looking up at him from across a pillow in a room he no longer allowed himself to remember. Get security, Vanessa said. She was speaking to Marco, not looking away from Damien. Vanessa, Damien said, get security and remove her. She is clearly someone's child who wandered in off the street. A beat. Or worse. She's not wandering, Damien said. Something in his voice had shifted, quieter, slower, the specific register he used when he was working something out. When all the other noise fell away and he was just thinking, hard and clean and cold. She came straight to me. She knew the aisle. She knew my name. She said, Daddy, Damien. She didn't say you're... She knew my face. That landed differently. Vanessa heard it. Half the front row heard it. Marco heard it and did not move toward the security stationed at the perimeter. Did not make the call Vanessa had asked for. Because Marco had known Damien Moretti for 19 years, and he knew the sound of a man who had just been hit by something real. The little girl still hadn't moved. She was patient in a way that children almost never were. Not the stunned stillness of a frightened child, but the quiet, waiting patience of a child who had been told something, had believed it, and was now simply waiting for the world to catch up to what she already knew. Damien crouched down. It was the thing nobody expected. Not Vanessa, not Marco, not the 412 guests, not the senator in the back row, not the 3 men from the Bologna family on the east balcony who had leaned forward almost in unison. Damien Moretti, the man who did not kneel before anything, folded himself down to eye level with this 6-year-old child in her pale blue dress and looked directly into her face. She looked back at him. No fear. No performance. Just those dark eyes with the amber fleck in the left one, watching him with the patience of someone who had waited a very long time for this specific moment. What's your name? He asked. His voice was low, just for her. She considered him for a moment, the way children consider answers when they're deciding how much truth to give. Then she said, Lily. Something moved across his face. Gone in a second, sealed back under the controlled surface before anyone but Marco could have caught it. But Marco caught it. Lily, Damien repeated. How did you get here today? Mama brought me, she said. She said to find you. She said you'd be here. Where's your mama? The little girl's expression changed for the first time. A slight tightening around the eyes, a small compression of her mouth, the particular look of a child trying to be brave about something that frightened her. She hugged the worn rabbit tighter. She was right outside, Lily said. But then some men came and she told me to run inside and find Daddy and not to stop. She paused. So I didn't stop. The words landed in Damien's chest like something physical. He stayed very still. What did your mama look like? He asked, though some part of him, the part that had been routing around the collapsed bridge for 6 years, already knew. She has long brown hair, Lily said, and her eyes are like mine. She said I have her eyes. She tilted her head. But she also says I have my daddy's eyes. She says we have the same ones. A pause, utterly innocent. Do we? Damien stood up slowly. He turned to Marco. One look. Nothing else needed. 19 years of shorthand compressed into 2 seconds of eye contact. Marco was already moving, phone to his ear, heading for the side door the child had come through. Demessa stepped forward, and the gentleness she had briefly lost came back into her voice. Calculated, precise. The gentleness of a woman who had learned that certain tones produce certain outcomes. Damien, whatever this is, we deal with it after the ceremony. We can't... There's not going to be a ceremony, Damien said. The words were very quiet. The entire ballroom heard them. Vanessa's face went through several changes in rapid succession, each one visible to the front 6 rows despite every effort to prevent it. Something complicated and furious moved behind her eyes. You cannot be serious. Take your guests to the reception hall, he said. Tell them whatever you want. Have the staff open the champagne. He was looking at the side door Marco had disappeared through, not at her. I'll cover the cost of the evening. The cost of the evening. Vanessa repeated it with the flat precision of someone who could not believe what they were hearing. Damien, there are 400 people in this room. There are sitting senators. I'm aware of who's in the room. You're going to walk out of your own wedding because of a child who wandered in off. She didn't wander. He looked at Vanessa then, direct, steady. The look he used when a conversation was over. She was sent. He picked Lily up. It was instinctive, or it was the closest thing to instinctive that a man like Damien Moretti had left in him after 20 years of surgically removing every impulse that hadn't passed through calculation first. He picked her up and she went easily, settling against his shoulder with the rabbit between them, as though she had done it before. As though some muscle memory he didn't know she had simply engaged and placed her exactly where she fit. She smelled like soap and something sweeter. Her hair was slightly tangled against his jaw. He carried her toward the side door. Behind him, 412 people watched in a silence so complete that the sound of his footsteps on the marble beyond the carpet runner was audible from the back row. He didn't turn around. He didn't explain. He walked through the side door and let it close behind him. In the antechamber beyond, Marco was already on a second phone call. The first lay on the ground, which meant the news was bad enough that Marco had needed 2 hands for whatever he was doing now. There were 2 catering staff members pressed against the far wall, looking like they wanted to become part of it. Near the service exit, the door stood open, kicked, not opened, the frame slightly splintered where the latch had been forced. Damien looked at the door, then at Marco. Marco ended the call. 2 men, Marco said. Staff at the valet stand said they saw a woman matching. He stopped, looked at Lily, who was listening with the attentive calm of a child who had learned that information was important. He chose his words. Matching a description being put into a vehicle. Black SUV, no plates. Damien's jaw tightened. Did they? He stopped himself again. Lily's head had turned slightly, her cheek still against his shoulder, her eyes moving between him and Marco. He recognized the calculus in her small face. She was young, but she was not naive, and whatever her mother had taught her, she had learned to read adult conversations the way adults forgot children could. She's okay, Marco said quietly. The staff said she went without a fight, like she... He paused again. Like she expected it. Like she expected it. Damien set Lily down carefully, crouching again so he was at her level. He looked at her face for a long moment, long enough that she looked back at him with the steady patience she had shown at the altar, waiting, holding the rabbit, not flinching. Your mama, he said slowly. Did she tell you anything before she sent you in? Lily considered this with visible seriousness, the way a child considers whether they've been told to keep a secret or just to be careful. Then she reached into the pocket of her pale blue dress and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She held it out to him. It was a small piece of paper, folded twice. On the outside, in handwriting that Damien recognized with a sensation like touching a live wire, controlled, left slanted, the particular way she pressed the pen slightly harder at the end of each word, was written one line. You were lied to. So was I. They have me again. He stared at it. They have me again. Again. The implication sat in his chest like something swallowed wrong. Not the first time. Again. Which meant there was a first time, a story before this story, a sequence of events that had been kept from him, deliberately, systematically, by someone or several someones who had constructed a version of his history that omitted whatever the truth was. He folded the paper once, precisely, and put it in his inside jacket pocket. He stood. Marco, he said, pull the Riordan crew off the East Side job. The job starts Tuesday. Pull them off. I need everyone on this. He looked at the open service door, at the afternoon light coming through it, at the street beyond where a black SUV with no plates had driven away with a woman he had spent 6 years trying to erase from his own memory. All of them, tonight. Damien, Marco's voice had shifted. It had the particular quality it acquired when Marco was about to say something Damien wasn't going to want to hear. If this is Elena, it's Elena. Then you need to think about what that means before you... I know what it means. Do you? Because the last time Elena Cross was in your life, we lost 8 men. We lost the Hartwell contracts. We lost... I know what we lost, Marco. The words came out with an edge that silenced the room. Even the 2 catering staff against the wall seemed to stop breathing. Marco closed his mouth. Lily was looking at Damien again, still holding the rabbit, still patient. But there was something in her face now. Not fear, not quite, but the awareness of a child who understood that the world she had just walked into was not a simple one, and who was measuring the man in front of her against whatever her mother had told her about him, running the comparison in real time. Damien looked back at her, at the amber fleck in her left eye. His left eye had the same one. He had looked at it in enough mirrors to know the exact angle and shape of it. "Lily," he said, "are you hungry?" She blinked. The question surprised her, probably not what she'd expected from the man she'd just walked a wedding aisle to find. Then, with the pure pragmatism of a 6-year-old who had been through an unusual morning, "A little." "Okay," he said, "we're going to get you something to eat, and you're going to stay with my friend Marco while I make some calls." He looked at Marco. "She doesn't leave your sight." "Understood," Marco said. The edge in his voice was gone. And now a 6-year-old girl with his eyes had walked down an aisle and handed him a piece of paper that said he had been wrong. Not simply wrong, engineered to be wrong. They have me again. Again. He thought about the Marchetti War. About the specific sequence of events that had ended his marriage and his trust in Elena Cross simultaneously, in the same week, in a way that had felt... He saw this clearly now, standing in the antechamber with the paper in his hand, in a way that had felt almost too perfectly timed, too clean. 2 revelations in 5 days, each one reinforcing the other, each one arriving with just enough evidence attached to foreclose further investigation. He had been a different man then. 35, 2 years into the worst conflict the syndicate had seen in a decade, running on 4 hours of sleep and the particular paranoia that combat-level stress produces in men who are responsible for other men's lives. He had received the information. He had looked at the documentation. He had made a decision. He had made it in 72 hours. The fastest decision of his life for the most permanent consequence of his life, and he had made it in 72 hours at the worst possible moment, with the worst possible amount of sleep, surrounded by men who were feeding him information and whom he had never once, in the heat of those 72 hours, stopped to independently verify. His jaw was very tight. He folded the paper one more time and put it back in his pocket. From the ballroom on the other side of the wall, he could hear the low, confused murmur of 400 guests processing what had just happened. He could hear Vanessa's voice somewhere in it, controlled but edged, orchestrating, managing, the natural reflex of a woman who managed everything. She would spin it. She was good at spinning things. He had chosen her in part for that. His phone buzzed. "Marco." He answered. "She's eating cake," Marco said. "She's fine. But Damien, I just heard from Petrov. The black SUV was spotted on the Meridian Bridge 20 minutes ago. It was heading east." East was the warehouse district. East was the stretch of the city that had changed hands 3 times in the last 4 years, as different factions of the syndicate contracted and expanded. East was the territory of men who operated in the gaps left by larger organizations. Men who were ambitious, resourceful, and careful, the most dangerous combination. "Who runs the East Side now?" Damien asked. He knew the answer. He wanted to hear Marco say it. A brief pause. Then, Harlan Voss. Harlan Voss. Damien had not thought that name in 2 years, had not needed to. Voss was mid-level, a fixer and information broker who had climbed steadily through the syndicate's lower ranks over the past decade by making himself useful to whoever happened to be most powerful at any given moment. A talent for reading the room, for attaching himself to strength, for being present at key moments in ways that no one quite noticed until the moment had passed. He had been present during the Marchetti War. He had been, in fact, one of the men who had brought Damien the documentation about Elena. Damien stood very still. The chandelier light was reaching him through the gap under the antechamber door, falling in a thin line across the marble floor near his feet, breaking into small pieces on the surface. He looked at it. "Get me Petrov and Costa," he said. "Tell them to pull their active work. I want everyone we can spare mobilized in the next 2 hours. Vanessa is going to..." Vanessa is the least of my concerns right now. Another pause. Shorter. Understood. And Marco. He stopped. Thought. When you're back with Lily, don't tell her anything about what's happening. I don't want her scared. I don't want her asking questions I can't answer yet. What do I tell her if she asks about her mother? Damien looked at the thin line of light on the marble. Tell her mother is going to be okay. He paused. And mean it. Kids know when you don't mean it. He hung up. He stood alone for another 10 seconds. Then he turned toward the service exit. The kicked open door, the splintered frame, the afternoon light beyond it. Harlan Voss. 6 years of lies, a 6-year-old daughter he hadn't known existed, and a woman who had apparently spent those 6 years running from something that had now caught up to her on the one day she had chosen to surface and point him toward the truth. She had sent the child in because she knew what was coming. She had sent Lily to him deliberately, not just to find him, but to be with him, to be safe with him, which meant Elena still believed, after everything, after 6 years of separation and silence and whatever had happened to her in those years, that Damien Moretti was the right person to protect their daughter. That was either profound trust or profound desperation. Probably both. He walked through the service exit. The afternoon air hit him, cooler than the ballroom, carrying the smell of the street, exhaust, and concrete, and the particular urban smell of a city that didn't stop moving for anything. Not weddings, not wars, not the collapse of carefully constructed lives. He stood on the service alley behind the Meridian Grand and looked east toward the skyline, where the warehouse district began, and where, somewhere in it, in a black SUV with no plates, a woman with brown hair and amber-flecked dark eyes was being taken to a place he hadn't yet located but would. He fixed his jacket. He straightened his cuffs. Then Damien Moretti walked east, and the door swung shut behind him, and somewhere in the kitchen of the Meridian Grand Ballroom, a 6-year-old girl named Lily held a worn rabbit tightly and ate chocolate cake and waited for a father she had believed in her whole life to come back through the door. She had waited 6 years already. She was very good at it. But what Damien didn't know yet, what none of them knew, not Marco, not Petrov, not Costa, not the senator in the back row, not Vanessa Hale smoothing her silk dress and telling 400 guests that there had been a family emergency, was that the black SUV had not gone to Harlan Voss's warehouses. It had gone somewhere else entirely, somewhere that would require Damien to dismantle everything he thought he knew about the Marchetti War, about his own organization, about the men he had trusted his life to, before he would find her. And one of those men was in this building right now. The city did not care that Damien Moretti's wedding had just collapsed in front of 400 witnesses. It moved the way it always moved, indifferent, mechanical, the light cycling from green to red to green on streets that had seen worse and would see worse again. He walked 2 blocks east before Costa pulled up in a dark sedan, no words exchanged at the curb, just the door opening and Damien getting in and the car moving again before the door was fully shut. Costa drove. Costa always drove. He was a compact, quiet man of 47 with a gray streak running through his dark hair above his left ear. The result, allegedly, of a night 11 years ago that he declined to discuss, and that no one who had been present declined to discuss either because they were no longer in a position to discuss anything. He drove the way he did everything, without excess motion, without commentary, with the precise economy of a man who had learned long ago that the fewer words you used, the less often you were wrong. Voss, Damien said. Already working it, Costa said. Petrov? Pulling the Eastgate job now. He's not happy. He doesn't need to be happy. No, Costa agreed. He just needs to be useful. They drove in silence for a moment. The city rolled past the windows. Shop fronts, pedestrians, a food cart on the corner of Delancey trailing steam into the gray afternoon air. Normal. Ordinary. The specific mundanity of a world that had no idea what was happening 3 feet inside the sedan moving through it. How many men does Voss have on the east side? Damien asked. Confirmed? 14. Probably closer to 20 if he's been building the way Petrov thinks he has. Costa paused. He's been building, Damien, quietly. The last 8 months, he's been pulling people, resources, contracts, things we should have flagged earlier. Why didn't we? A beat. Careful. Because he was doing it slowly, small moves. Nothing that broke any line we'd drawn. Someone helped him know where the lines were. Costa didn't answer immediately. This was one of his qualities. He did not fill silence with noise. He let the implication sit in the car between them like a third passenger, and he drove. Possibly, he said finally. Not possibly. Damien looked out the window. He knew exactly how far to push without triggering a response. That's not instinct. That's information. He paused. He has someone inside. The sedan moved through a yellow light. Costa's hands were steady on the wheel. If he has someone inside, Costa said, and we start asking who, that conversation is going to get ugly fast. Yes, Damien said. It is. They drove. The safe house was on the fourth floor of a converted textile building in the warehouse district's western edge. The clean edge, still technically Moretti territory, a building that appeared on paper to be leased by a mid-sized import firm that filed taxes and had a website and did not exist. Damien had used it twice before, both times during situations that required thinking before acting, which was becoming increasingly rare in his life and increasingly necessary. Marco was already there when they arrived, sitting at a table with Lily across from him, a half-empty plate of chocolate cake between them, and a deck of cards that Marco had produced from somewhere. He was teaching her a card game. He was doing it with the patient, slightly stiff concentration of a man who had not spent significant time with children and was compensating through sheer effort of will. Lily looked up when Damien walked in. He cheats, she said, pointing at Marco. I don't cheat, Marco said with dignity. You moved that card when I wasn't looking. That is called strategy. That's called cheating, Lily said, with the serene certainty of a child who knows she is right and has all the time in the world to wait for the adult to admit it. Damien sat down at the edge of the table. He looked at her, at the ease with which she had settled into an unfamiliar place, the way she had taken the strange circumstances of this day and sorted them into manageable categories. This man is safe. This man cheats at cards. I will wait here. Whatever Elena had taught her, she had taught her well. Lily, he said, the men who were with your mom this morning, had you seen them before? She set her cards face down on the table. The shift in her expression was small but precise, the particular alertness of a child switching from play mode to something more serious. One of them, she said. He came to our apartment 2 times before. He talked to Mama in the hallway, and she always closed the door so I couldn't hear. What did he look like? Tall, gray hair on the sides. He always wore a blue jacket. Damien looked at Marco. Marco pulled out his phone, opened a file, turned the screen to face Lily. This man? She looked at it. Her small face tightened slightly. Yes. Marco turned the screen back. The photo was of a man named Russell Payne, former mid-level enforcer, current independent contractor for whoever paid the most recently associated with Harlan Voss. Damien knew the name tangentially. He had never had direct dealings with Payne and had never had reason to. Someone had made sure of that. Okay, Damien said to Lily. Thank you. You did good. He looked at Marco. Then you... On it, Marco said, already standing, already moving to the far end of the room where the conversation wouldn't reach small ears. Lily watched Damien. She had picked up the rabbit from the chair beside her and was holding it in her lap, not clutching it the way she had in the ballroom. She was calmer now, more settled, but keeping it close. A comfort, not a lifeline. Are you going to find her? She asked. Yes, Damien said. Do you promise? He looked at her. He did not make promises as a general rule. Promises were obligations extended past the point of certainty, and he operated exclusively within zones of certainty. But she was 6 years old, and she was looking at him with those eyes. His eyes, her eyes, whatever combination they were. And the calculation he normally ran didn't fire. Yes, he said, I promise. She nodded once, as though this confirmed something she had already decided. Then she picked up her cards. Do you want to play? Marco cheats, but maybe you won't. I can't right now, he said, but later. Okay, she said, and she went back to her cards, reorganizing her hand with quiet concentration, and Damien stood and crossed the room to where Marco was waiting by the window with his phone and a face that had stopped being careful. Payne works for Voss, Marco said quietly. We knew that. What we didn't know, what I just got from Petrov, is that Voss has been in contact with someone in our inner circle for at minimum 8 months. Petrov's guy intercepted a partial communication 2 weeks ago that he didn't bring to us because he thought it was a deadline, a burner that had gone inactive. He pulled it tonight when I asked him to look. He paused. The burner was registered to a dummy address, but the signal was bounced through a relay that Petrov's people can place within a 6-block radius. Of where? Our building. The word sat there. Our building. The Meridian Tower, 11 floors, the 6th of which housed the operational center of everything Damien ran. The people with access to that floor could be counted on 2 hands. Damien knew all of them, had known all of them for years, had trusted all of them. Does Petrov have a name? Damien asked. Not yet. How long? He says 24 hours for higher confidence. Maybe 48 to be certain. He has 12, Damien said. Marco exhaled. He's going to say that's not 12 hours, Marco. Elena is somewhere in this city right now, and every hour we don't have her is an hour something else happens. His voice was flat, controlled. The words came out the way they always came out when the weight of a situation hit its limit. Not louder, quieter. Tell Petrov 12 hours, and tell him if he complains about it, I'll come talk to him myself. Marco did not comment on this. He sent the message. Damien turned to look out the window. The warehouse district spread east below them, a landscape of blocky shapes and corrugated roofs in the gray afternoon light, loading bays and security fencing, and the occasional yellow flicker of a working space's interior. Somewhere in it, somewhere in those blocks of industrious, patient, anonymous space, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered. Silence for 2 seconds. Then a voice, male, unhurried, with the specific brand of calm that came not from peace, but from complete confidence in one's own position. I was going to congratulate you on the wedding, Harlan Voss said. But I understand there was a complication. Damien said nothing. She really does look like you, Voss continued. The girl. I've seen her twice now. Once from a distance, once a bit closer. The eyes are remarkable. You'd think after 6 years you'd have figured out she existed, but then you were given very specific reasons not to look, weren't you? Where is Elena? Damien said. Safe. For the moment. I want you to understand that she is not being harmed. This is not a situation where I want her damaged. She has value, and I'm not stupid enough to damage things that have value. A pause. Unlike the people who managed her disappearance 6 years ago, they were rather less careful. What do you want? That's a larger conversation, one that requires you to come to me, or rather, to come to a specific understanding first. Voss's voice didn't change and register, but something in its rhythm shifted, slower, more deliberate. You were deceived, Damien, 6 years ago. I imagine you've already started to work that out. The question I'm placing in front of you is whether you want the truth or whether you want to continue operating within the comfortable version of events that was constructed for you. I want Elena. I know, but you can't have Elena without first understanding why she left, why she couldn't come back, and who in your organization made certain she couldn't. Another pause. And that second part, the who, is going to require you to look at people you've trusted with everything, people you've defended, people who were in that ballroom today watching a little girl call you daddy and calculating what it meant for their own survival. Damien's grip on the phone was precise and controlled. Everything about him was precise and controlled. The only evidence of what was happening underneath it was the slight whitening of his knuckle along the right side of the handset. You're claiming to be on my side, Damien said. I'm claiming to have information that is worth more to you than anything else you currently possess, Voss said. Whether that makes me an ally or a transaction is entirely up to you. Where do you want to meet? I'll be in touch. In the meantime, keep the girl close and think carefully about who you allow to know she exists. The pause this time was longer. Not all of them will want her to be safe, Damien. Some of them have very specific reasons to want to make sure she never talks to you at all. The call ended. Damien lowered the phone. Marco had been watching his face. He didn't ask what Voss had said. He waited. He says someone in our organization buried Elena 6 years ago, Damien said, and that whoever it is knows Lily exists now. The room was very quiet. From across it, the soft sound of Lily shuffling her cards. Marco's expression did not dramatically change. This was one of his qualities and also, in this moment, one of his failures. His face moved slowly, processing internally, which meant Damien could not read the first instinct, only what Marco decided to let through after it had passed through whatever filter he applied. Voss is an information broker, Marco said. He could be running a play. Feed you a narrative, keep you chasing shadows while he what? Damien said. What does he gain from having Elena? She doesn't have operational knowledge. She's been outside the organization for 6 years. Whatever she knows is 6 years stale. She knows why she left. Yes. Damien looked at him. She does. Marco held his gaze. And you think that's enough to weaponize? I think someone thought it was enough to bury her over. He paused. Twice. The word landed. Marco absorbed it. You said twice. Voss said something about how she was managed 6 years ago. He implied she was taken once before. Or held. Something happened to her during the Marchetti period that I don't have the full picture on. Damien moved to the table along the wall, pulled out his phone, opened the files he kept encrypted on a separate partition. The records from the Marchetti War period. The documentation that had been brought to him about Elena's alleged betrayal. He had not looked at these files in 3 years. He had not needed to. The documentation I was shown in the Marchetti period. The phone records. The intercepts. Who brought them to me? Marco was quiet for a moment. Voss brought the initial intercept. It passed through 2 other people before it reached you. Tarrant and... He stopped. And Gio, Damien said. Giovanni Ferrara, Damien's financial officer, 18 years in the organization. The man who had been seated in the 3rd row of the Meridian Grand Ballroom this afternoon and who had not come to find Damien after the disruption, had not called, had not texted, had not done any of the things that a loyal man of 18 years would naturally do when his boss's wedding fell apart in spectacular fashion. Damien had not noticed this until now. He noticed it now. Where is Gio? He asked. Marco checked his phone, typed something, waited. The wait was 15 seconds, which was longer than it should have been for a simple location check. Marco's expression did the slow processing thing again. His driver says he left the ballroom approximately 3 minutes after you did. Where did he go? The driver took him to a restaurant on Caldwell Street. He's been there since. A pause. He ordered dinner. He ordered dinner. Yes. Damien thought about this. His wedding had shattered in front of 400 people, including a man who had worked beside him for 18 years, and that man had gone to a restaurant and ordered dinner. Not because he was so unflappable that chaos didn't affect his appetite, because he had known it was coming, because he had already made his next move before the first domino had fallen. Don't approach him, Damien said. I wasn't going to. Don't have anyone approach him. Don't alert anyone who might warn him. Right now he thinks we don't know what we know. He looked at Marco. Let him eat. And then? Then I'm going to have a conversation with him that he will not enjoy. From across the room, Lily looked up from her cards. She had arranged them into some private order on the table in front of her and was studying the arrangement with the focused attention of a child who had made a game of her own when the available games ran out. She met Damien's eyes for a moment across the room. She didn't say anything. She looked at him in the way she had at the altar, that patient, steady appraisal, and then looked back at her cards. He walked to the far window, away from the table, turned his back to give himself the illusion of privacy, in a room where everyone could still hear everything. He pulled up a contact and called. She answered on the second ring. Damien. Vanessa's voice was controlled, but carrying something under the control. Not hurt, not grief, something harder and more complex than either. Humiliation, maybe. Vanessa Hale did not experience humiliation easily, and she did not process it gently. 400 people, Damien. I know. The senator from the 3rd District left without speaking to anyone. The Bologna family sent their people home. Whatever your... A pause, deliberate. Whatever that situation was, you have now publicly embarrassed every significant relationship this ceremony was designed to formalize. I know. And you're calling me now because you want to explain, or because you want something. He paused. Both. Then explain first. The child is mine, he said. I'm almost certain. 6 years ago, during the Marchetti period, I was given false documentation about Elena. Someone manufactured evidence of a betrayal that didn't happen. She disappeared to protect the child from whoever had set her up. She's been hiding for 6 years. Tonight she's been taken by people connected to someone inside my organization. He laid it out flat, without inflection, the way he would have laid out a financial report. I need to know if you have information about Elena's disappearance 6 years ago that you haven't told me. Silence. Not the silence of someone thinking, the silence of someone deciding. Vanessa. I met Elena once, she said. Her voice had shifted. Less performance, more careful. Before you and I were involved, at a charity event, she was… A pause. She wasn't what I expected. What did you expect? Someone weaker. Another pause. She was very controlled, very watchful. She said something to me, briefly, at the bar. We were only talking for a few minutes. She said, "Be careful with the people who have the most to gain from being trusted." A beat. I thought it was a strange thing to say to someone you'd just met. I thought she was warning me about you. Maybe she was warning you about someone else. The silence again, shorter this time. Damien, I need to tell you something, and I need you to understand that I didn't think it was relevant. I genuinely didn't, until right now. Tell me. Giovanni Ferrara came to me 6 weeks ago. He said he had concerns about the wedding. Not the wedding itself, but the timing of it. He said he called them legacy complications from your previous marriage that could surface at an inopportune moment and embarrass the family publicly. She stopped. He asked me to tell him immediately if I was ever contacted by Elena Cross or anyone associated with her. He framed it as protective. He said he was looking out for you. The silence this time came from Damien's end. He asked you to report to him, Damien said. Yes. And you agreed. A pause. The sound of someone on the other end of a phone deciding whether to be honest or strategic, and choosing, perhaps for the first time in a long relationship with strategy, honest. Yes. I thought it was reasonable. I thought it was organizational protocol. Another pause. I was also… She stopped. I was also being watched, Damien. Things reported back. I didn't know who was reporting or to whom until 2 weeks ago when I found a device in my private office. I removed it. I didn't know who placed it. Did you tell anyone? No, I didn't know who I could trust. He absorbed this. The device. Do you still have it? I kept it, yes. Bring it to Costa tonight. Don't go through my main office. Call Costa directly. You have his number. He paused. Vanessa, He stopped. The apology he'd been about to give was real but incomplete, and this was not the time for incomplete things. We'll talk more about the rest of it later. There's going to be a later? There's going to be a conversation, he said. What happens after that depends on the conversation. He ended the call. Costa was waiting near the door. He had been waiting with the quiet, attentive patience of a man who had heard pieces of 3 different conversations and was holding them separately in his head, not assembling them yet, waiting for the signal. Damien gave it a slight tilt of the head, east-facing. Costa understood. He stepped out into the hallway to make calls. Damien stood for a moment in the middle of the room. The safe house felt smaller than it had an hour ago. Not physically, but in the way rooms shrank when the weight of a situation found its full dimensions. 18 years of trust with Giovanni Ferrara. 18 years of proximity, of shared decisions, of the particular intimacy of men who operated together in spaces where mistakes were fatal. 18 years that had apparently contained, somewhere in their interior, a seam of calculation running opposite to everything Damien had believed he was building. He looked at Lily. She had fallen asleep over her cards. She was sitting upright in the chair, her head tilted slightly to one side, the rabbit in her lap, her hand still loosely holding 2 cards as though she had planned to place them and simply run out of wakefulness before she could. Her breath was slow and even. The tangle of dark hair had fallen across her cheek. Damien pulled a jacket from the hook near the door. Not his, Marco's, oversized and slightly worn at the left cuff, and draped it carefully over her shoulders. She shifted slightly, settling deeper into the chair, pulling the rabbit closer without waking. He stood over her for a moment. 6 years. She was 6 years old, which meant Elena had been pregnant during the worst weeks of the Marchetti War, during the weeks when Damien had been shown documentation and phone records and had made the fastest and most permanent decision of his life. Had been pregnant and had said nothing. or had tried to say something and been prevented, or had known already that the ground was collapsing under both of them and had made her own calculation, her own fastest decision, and chosen the one that kept the child alive, even if it meant disappearing. He thought about what that would have cost her. He tried to, at least. He had a good imagination for tactics and a limited one for certain kinds of pain, and he recognized that limit clearly enough to know he was only getting the shape of it, not the substance. His phone buzzed. Petrov this time, not a call, but a text. 4 words. Found the relay station. And then, 3 seconds later, Gio's prints are on it. Damien read the message twice. Then he put his phone in his pocket and sat down in the chair across from his sleeping daughter and looked at her quiet face in the dim light of the safe house room. Giovanni Ferrara had been in his organization for 18 years. He had been present at the Marchetti negotiations. He had been one of 3 people in the room when the decision was made to dissolve the Marchetti alliance, a decision that had started the war. He had been the person who organized the financial transfers that kept the organization running during those months, which meant he had seen every flow of money and every pressure point and every vulnerability that the organization had during its worst period. He had also been the second person to bring documentation about Elena's alleged betrayal. He had presented it personally. He had sat across from Damien in an office and said, in the careful, regretful tone of a man delivering terrible news he wished he didn't have, "I'm sorry. I know this is hard, but the evidence is clear. The evidence had been fabricated," which meant Giovanni Ferrara had sat across from him and delivered fabricated evidence about his wife with the face of a sorrowful friend, and had watched Damien make the decision that ended his marriage and had said nothing. And then, for 6 years, he had continued sitting across from him. In meetings, at dinners, at the table in the operational center on the 6th floor where decisions were made. 18 months ago, Damien had trusted him with the restructuring of the entire Northern Territory. 6 months ago, he had been the person Damien called first when a rival family made an approach that needed quiet negotiating. He had been the person Damien called first. The anger that moved through him was not hot. It was the specific cold anger that he had learned, over years of operating in environments where hot anger got you killed, to let move through him without showing it on his face or in his hands. It passed through him like a current, and he let it pass, and he sat and watched his daughter sleep. He needed to move carefully. Gio didn't know what Damien knew. That was the only advantage that existed right now, and it was an advantage that would expire the moment anyone in Gio's network noticed the investigation Petrov was running. He pulled up Gio's number, stared at it, then he typed a message. "Long day. Come by the Belmore tonight. Quiet drink. Need to clear my head." He sent it. The response came in under 2 minutes. "Of course." 9 o'clock? Damien looked at the message. At the ease of it, at the complete absence of any hesitation in a man who had just watched Damien's wedding implode and had gone to eat dinner and was now agreeing, without a single question, to a late-night meeting. No concern. No curiosity. No, "Are you all right?" Just the smooth, immediate accommodation of a man who wanted to be in the room. 9 o'clock, Damien replied. "Come alone." He put the phone down. From across the room, Marco caught his eye. Damien gave a single slow nod. Marco looked at the phone, at the exchange, and his face did the slow processing thing one more time, and then something in it settled. The expression of a man who had arrived at a conclusion he didn't enjoy but could live with. "You're going to bring him in," Marco said quietly. Not a question. "I'm going to talk to him," Damien said, "and he's going to tell me everything about Elena, about the Marchetti evidence, about Voss and how long that relationship has been running." He looked at Lily sleeping under Marco's jacket. "And then I'm going to find out where they're keeping her." "And if Gio doesn't give you Voss's location?" Damien looked at him. Marco asked no further questions. The room was quiet, except for Lily's even breathing and the distant, indifferent sound of the city moving outside the windows. And somewhere across town, Giovanni Ferrara was finishing his dinner, checking his phone, calculating his angles, confident in the belief that 18 years of proximity had made him invisible. He would arrive at the Belmore at 9 o'clock. He would come through the door expecting a shaken man looking for a steady presence. What he would find instead was the moment his carefully constructed 18 years ran out of time, and somewhere out there, in a location Damien did not yet have, but would, Elena Cross was waiting in whatever room they had put her in, and she was not waiting passively. and she had already begun to make the move that would change everything before morning came. The Belmore was not a bar in any decorative sense. It had a counter, and it had bottles, and it had 4 tables arranged without imagination along one wall. And the man who ran it had worked for Damien's organization for 11 years, and understood that his primary function was not hospitality, but discretion. The lights were low, the bottles were real. The room behind the main space, separated by a door that locked from the inside and had no window, was where Damien waited at 8:53, sitting at a table with a glass of water he hadn't touched, and the particular quality of stillness he carried when he was doing something that required all of him. Costa stood behind him and to the left, not against the wall, in the room, present, a physical statement about the nature of the evening. Marco was not there. Marco was at the safe house with Lily, which was where he needed to be, and the absence of Marco was itself a message Damien was sending, that this was not a meeting that required a mediator. Giovanni Ferrara came through the door at 9:02. He was 63 years old, silver-haired, with the kind of face that had been handsome 30 years ago and had settled into something more useful than handsome. Trustworthy, the face said, experienced, the face of a man you would want at your side during a difficult situation. He wore a charcoal jacket over a dark shirt, no tie, the deliberate informality of a man who had read the message, quiet drink, clear my head, and dressed accordingly, which meant he had thought about it, which meant he was already performing. He came through the door and saw Damien at the table, and his face arranged itself into the expression Damien recognized as Gio's version of concerned sympathy. Warm, steady, the face he used when delivering bad news or receiving it. He pulled out the chair across from Damien and sat. "Hell of a day," Gio said. "Sit down," Damien said. Gio had already sat. The instruction had not been a response to his action. It had been something else, a reorientation of the room, a statement about who was directing this. Gio registered it. Something very small shifted in his eyes. Not alarm, not yet. The small shift of a man recalibrating. "You want to talk about what happened?" Gio asked. "I want to talk about Elena Cross," Damien said. The room was quiet. The sounds of the bar on the other side of the door were distant and muffled. A glass moved, a low exchange between the bartender and no one. Inside the room, only the hum of the ventilation and Giovanni Ferrara's breath, which had changed in its rhythm in a way that was small enough to miss if you weren't looking for it. Damien was looking for it. "Elena," Gio said. The name came out measured. "After today. That's understandable. The girl showing up like that. Where is she, Gio?" The first time he'd said her name, it had been a topic. The second time was a demand. Gio heard the difference. The warmth in his face didn't disappear. It was too practiced for that. But something underneath it went very still. "I don't know where Elena is," he said. "I didn't know she was—" "Don't," Damien said it quietly. One word. The kind of quiet that costs something to maintain. "I have Petrov's report. I have the relay station with your prints on it. I have your communication logs with Voss going back 14 months. He paused. "I have a statement from Vanessa about the device you had placed in her office and the arrangement you made with her about reporting any contact from Elena." He looked at Gio across the table with the flat, absolute attention of someone who has already made a decision and is waiting for a formality to conclude. "What I don't have yet is your explanation, so explain." Gio sat with it for a moment. It was interesting to watch. Damien had sat across from a lot of men over the years in rooms like this one, men who were confronted with the evidence of what they were, and they responded in patterns. Some got loud, some collapsed, some made a third attempt at the performance they'd been running, pushing it harder, as though the problem was volume rather than substance. A few, the ones who were genuinely skilled, went quiet in a way that was not defeat, but transition, moving from one posture to another, finding the angle that still gave them something to work with. Gio was in the last category. He was quiet for 11 seconds. Then he set his hands flat on the table, palms down, a gesture of deliberate openness, and he looked at Damien with something that was almost the truth. "Elena was going to destroy you," he said. "Tell me something I haven't already decided is a lie." "I'm not lying." His voice had changed. The warmth was gone, the performance was gone, and what replaced it was older and less pleasant but more real. "I'm telling you what I believed, what I still believe." He leaned forward slightly. You were 35 years old in the middle of the worst conflict we'd had in a decade. You were running on nothing. You weren't thinking straight about her. You hadn't been thinking straight about her since you married her, because she was the one thing you wouldn't calculate. You loved her, Damien, which for you is the same thing as being blind, and she knew it. And the evidence you brought me was real, Gio said. At the time, I believed it was real. And now? A pause, shorter than it should have been. Now I'm less certain. Less certain. Damien repeated the phrase with the same precision with which you'd repeat a number that had come out wrong on a second calculation. You helped destroy my marriage, and you kept a child from me for 6 years based on evidence you are now, tonight, with Petrov's report in my pocket, telling me you're less certain about. It was corroborated, Gio said, and for the first time something that was not performance entered his voice, something defensive, which meant something real. 3 independent sources: The Intercept, the financial trace, the contact log. I didn't fabricate it. I received it, and I vetted it, and I believed it. Who gave you the initial intercept? Silence. Gio. Damien's voice dropped further. It was the specific register that Costa, behind him, recognized and responded to with a slight shift in his stance. Not threatening, just present. Who gave you the first piece? Giovanni Ferrara looked at the table. He looked at his hands on the table. He was 63 years old, and he had been in this organization longer than most of the men currently in it had been adults, and he sat with the evidence of what he'd done spread across an invisible table between them, and he said, in a voice that had shed the last of everything except the plain fact, Vanessa. The room was very quiet. Vanessa Hale gave you the initial intercept on Elena Cross, Damien said. Not a question. A confirmation being spoken aloud so that it could not unbe spoken. She brought it to me 18 months before she was introduced to you as a social contact, Gio said. She said she had obtained it through a security consultant she'd used for personal matters. She said it showed Elena feeding information about your northern operations to the Marchetti people. She said she didn't know what to do with it and had brought it to me because she trusted my judgment. He stopped. I ran it through 2 verification channels. Both came back confirming. I brought it to you. Damien sat with this. The sequence assembled itself with the cold mechanical clarity of something that had been waiting to be assembled. Vanessa, who had appeared 18 months before the end of the Marchetti War, introduced through a mutual connection whose name Damien was now reviewing in his memory with extreme attention. Vanessa, who had maintained a relationship with him for 3 years before the engagement. Vanessa, who had asked him, early in their relationship, in the careful way that people ask things they need to know without appearing to need to know them, about the circumstances of his previous marriage, about Elena. Vanessa, who had brought a device to Gio that triggered an investigation that ended a marriage and drove a woman with a newborn child into hiding. And Vanessa, who had called him this evening and told him about the device in her office and about Gio's arrangement with her, told him in a tone that sounded like honesty, that felt like honesty, because it contained truth, specifically the truths that would redirect his attention and establish her as a victim rather than an architect. His jaw tightened. He thought about the call, about what she'd said and how she'd said it, about the slight pauses that had felt like courage, the pauses of someone deciding to be honest, and how those pauses were equally consistent with someone deciding which truths to release and which to keep. Be careful with the people who have the most to gain from being trusted. What Elena had said to her at the bar 6 years ago, before all of it. She had warned her. Vanessa had sat across from him for 3 years and listened to him build trust in her, and had been warned at the beginning of it by the woman whose life she was methodically disassembling. The irony of it was almost architectural. Where does Voss fit? Damien said. Gio shifted in his chair, the first real physical discomfort of the evening. Voss approached me 14 months ago. He said he had information about Elena, that she was alive, that she had the child, that she was planning to surface. He stopped. He said he could manage it. Keep her quiet. Keep her contained. Ensure she didn't reach you. And you paid him to do that. I engaged him to monitor the situation, Gio said, with the specific precision of a man who was still choosing words. I didn't tell him to hurt anyone. He took her today, Gio. I know. Something moved across his face. That was I did not authorize. Where is she? The words came out flat and final, stripped of everything except the demand at their center. Right now, where has Voss taken her? Gio's hands pressed harder against the table. His eyes moved, not away but down, the specific eye movement of someone doing a rapid internal calculation of what remaining options looked like. There's a property, he said. Voss uses it for holding. A processing facility near the Cordell Pier. It looks active. There are shipping containers moving in and out, but the eastern section has been converted. I've never been there, but I know the address. Give it to me. He gave it. Damien did not write it down. He looked at Costa, who had already memorized it. Then Damien stood. Gio, he said. He looked at the older man sitting at the table with his hands flat and his face emptied of performance. In 18 years, I defended you to men who didn't trust you. I gave you authority that some people in our organization thought was too much. I put you in rooms where decisions were made that shaped everything we built. He paused. I need you to understand that I know exactly what you cost me, and I need you to understand that I'm not going to deal with it tonight, because tonight I have something more important to do. He looked at Costa. Stay with him. Damien, Gio said. Damien walked out. The bar on the other side of the door was still dim and quiet, the bartender not looking up from the glass he was cleaning, the professional unseen of a man who worked for people who valued it. Damien passed through it and out the front door and into the night air of the street. He called Petrov before he reached the car. Cordell Pier, he said, eastern section of a processing facility. Get me everything on that property in the next 30 minutes. Already have something, Petrov said, and the tone of it, the slightly compressed quality of his voice, stopped Damien on the sidewalk. I was about to call you. What? We've been running the relay intercepts backward, tracking the communication chain from Voss's people to Gio and looking for branches. A pause. There's a branch we didn't expect, a secondary line running parallel to the Gio channel. It's been active for longer, 22 months, and it terminates at a different endpoint. Who? That's what I've been trying to confirm. The endpoint uses a rotating encryption that our system cracked 40 minutes ago. Another pause, shorter. Damien, the secondary channel goes to Vanessa Hale's private server. He stood on the sidewalk. The city moved around him. A taxi passed. Two people came out of a building across the street and walked north without looking at him. A light changed. Everything continued in its indifferent, mechanical way. 22 months. The secondary channel had been active for 22 months, which was 8 months before the engagement, which was concurrent with Vanessa actively building the relationship with him. The dinners, the appearances, the slow, patient construction of trust. She had been running a communication line to Voss for 22 months, which meant she had known about Elena's location, had known about Lily, had known the full picture, and had chosen exactly what to tell him tonight. The device, the arrangement with Gio, the partial truth packaged to look like courage, while the deeper line ran underneath it, untouched. She had told him about Gio to protect herself. She had given him a target to move toward so he wouldn't look at where she was standing. Where is Vanessa now? He said. His voice was very quiet. Her car is... A pause. Typing. Her car left the Meridian 40 minutes ago. Her driver logged a destination of the Caldwell house, her private residence. But Damien, Petrov's voice had the compressed quality again. She didn't go there. Where? Her car was picked up on traffic cameras heading east toward the Pier District, toward Cordell Pier, toward wherever Voss was keeping Elena. The sequence completed itself in the space of one breath, and it was so clean, so geometrically precise, that the only response available to him was the specific cold fury of a man who understood exactly how thoroughly he had been managed. Not fooled, managed, sustained, patient, multi-year management of his attention, his trust, his decisions. Vanessa had not been reacting to events. She had been directing them. And the call this evening, the evidence about Gio, the wounded but honest tone, had been the final move, designed not just to redirect him, but to get herself through his attention and into position. Position for what? He moved. The car was half a block down. He was in it before Costa's man had fully registered the instruction, moving on the instinct that preceded language, and they were heading east through the night city before the destination had been formally stated. He told the driver Cordell Pier, and then he called Marco. Stay with Lily, he said. Do not move from that location. Do not tell anyone where you are. A pause. Anyone, Marco? Lock the door. What happened? Vanessa is moving toward Voss's location. Silence. Then, she's in on it. She's not in on it, Damien said. She built it. He watched the city change outside the windows. The commercial district giving way to the transitional blocks. Warehouses starting. The street quality roughening. The lighting thinning out. She built it and used Geo as an instrument and fed me his name tonight to give herself a clear path. Clear path to what? I don't know yet. And that was the thing. The open question. The variable he couldn't yet solve. What did Vanessa want with Elena? What was the endgame of 22 months of coordination with Voss, of 6 years of knowing where Elena was, of an elaborate construction that had placed Vanessa at Damien's side for 3 years? But Elena is in that building, and whatever Vanessa is walking into that building to do, she's going to do it before I arrive. The car accelerated. Cordell Pier was 14 minutes from the Belmore at normal traffic. It was 9 minutes at the speed Damien's driver was now using, moving through amber lights and side streets with the practiced efficiency of someone who had driven fast in this city before and knew which roads tolerated it. Damien loaded his phone, pulled up the property records Petrov had sent. The facility was registered to a logistics company, standard shell structure, 2 layers deep, the kind of registration that looked clean to anyone who wasn't specifically looking for it to be dirty. The eastern section was listed as storage. 12,000 square feet, no active business license for that section, 1 access point on the east face and 2 on the south. 1 access point on the east face. That was where you went in if you didn't want to be seen from the main approach. Driver, he said, come around from the north, kill the lights at the turn. The driver killed the lights. They came around through the back approach of the Pier District, the narrow service road that ran behind the active loading operations, and the facility materialized in the darkness ahead. A long, low building with a corrugated roof, the western section lit and active, the eastern section dark except for 1 ground-level light near a door in the south face. A car was parked near that door. Black. No plates. Not Vanessa's car. Not a car he recognized, but parked with the specific directional positioning of a vehicle whose driver expected to leave quickly. 20 meters behind it, Vanessa's cream-colored sedan was pulling up without headlights. Damien was out of his car before it fully stopped. He moved fast and low across the open ground between the service road and the east section, using the shipping containers stacked along the facility's perimeter as cover, reaching the near corner of the building with the particular economy of motion that his body still remembered from a period of his life he didn't discuss. He pressed against the corrugated wall. Cold metal. The smell of the pier, brine and machine oil, and the particular industrial smell of a place that processed things. Vanessa was at the door. She had a phone to her ear. She was talking, but Damien was 20 meters out, and the wind off the pier was eating the words. He saw her posture, not the cultivated posture of the ballroom, not the deliberate physical management she maintained in public spaces. Something different, urgent. Leaning forward slightly, the body language of someone in the middle of an argument they were trying to win fast. She lowered the phone. She looked at the door. Then she looked directly to her right, at the space between 2 containers where Damien was standing, and their eyes met across 20 meters of dark space. She did not run. She did not call out. She went very still in the way of a person who has been found and is calculating what being found means. Damien walked toward her. When he was close enough that his voice would carry without carrying further, "What are you doing here?" "Damien, don't say my name like that. Don't do the tone. Just answer the question." She looked at him. In the dim ground-level light from the door, her face was not the face she wore in public or in the constructed intimacy of their relationship. It was something older and more tired, the face of a woman who had been holding something up for a long time and was feeling the weight of it. "I came to stop it," she said. "Stop what?" "Voss is going to kill her." The words came out without framing, without the careful packaging she usually applied. Plain, direct. He was supposed to keep her contained. That was the arrangement. She stays quiet, she stays safe, she never reaches you. But tonight changed the calculus for him. Lily reached you. Elena's existence is no longer containable. She held his gaze. He doesn't contain things he can't control. He removes them. The cold that moved through Damien was not the controlled anger from the Belmore. It was something else, faster, less managed, the specific physiological response of a man who has just understood that the timeline he was working with is shorter than he believed. "How long ago did you know he was going to move on her?" he said. 20 minutes. He sent a message through a channel I monitor. "A channel you monitor." He repeated it. "Through the private server." Her face changed, minimally. A slight compression around the eyes. She hadn't known he knew about the server. She processed the fact that he knew, processed what it implied about what else he knew, and she made a decision in about 4 seconds that Damien watched happen in real time. "Yes," she said. "Tell me why the server right now. You have 30 seconds before I go through that door without you." She exhaled. One breath. Then, "I was hired to get close to you 3 years ago. Someone inside your organization, someone who wanted leverage over you without appearing to have it, approached me through an intermediary. The arrangement was information. I reported things to Voss. Voss passed them to his principal. I didn't know who the principal was for the first 16 months. And then you found out." "And then I found out," she said. "And I understood what the whole construction was actually for. And by that point I was already in it far enough that walking away wasn't an option, because the person behind it was not someone you walked away from." "Who?" Damien said. "From inside this building, something broke. A sound, sharp, the specific sound of something overturned under force. Both of them went still." Damien looked at the door, then at Vanessa. "Who is the principal?" he said. One more time, final. She looked at him with the specific expression of a woman who has spent 3 years performing a version of herself and is now, in the dark outside a building where someone is going to die, looking at the person she performed it for and calculating whether the truth is a protection or an accelerant. "Gio didn't work for Voss," she said. "Voss worked for Gio. The money, the operations, the decision to take Elena tonight, all of it came from Gio." She stopped. "But Gio doesn't work alone. He never did. He has a partner in this, someone who has been running the financial architecture of the whole arrangement, someone who has access to the organization's accounts and has been redirecting funds to Voss's operation for 3 years. She held his gaze. "Someone you left sitting in a room back at the Belmore." "Costa." The name arrived before she said it. The only person he had left with Gio, the only person who had been in every room for every conversation this evening, who had memorized the Cordell Pier address without being asked to write it down, who had been present through all of it with the patient, economical stillness of a man who processed internally and revealed selectively. Costa, whose gray streak had appeared 11 years ago after a night he'd declined to discuss. Costa, who had driven him east tonight without a single question. Costa, who was sitting in a room at the Belmore right now with his phone. Damien's phone buzzed. He looked at it. A text from a number he didn't recognize. 4 words and a photograph. The photograph was of Lily. Asleep in the safe house chair, Marco's jacket over her shoulders, the worn rabbit in her lap. Taken from the window. From outside. Someone had been outside that window tonight, with a camera or a phone, and had taken that photograph while she slept. The 4 words read, "She's still so small." The ground shifted under everything. Not Lily. They had Lily's location. They had eyes on her right now, at this moment, through a window of a building that was supposed to be safe, and the person who had sent this message knew exactly where she was, which meant the safe house was compromised, which meant Marco was in that room with a 6-year-old child and did not know that someone was outside the window. He called Marco. It rang 4 times. 5. 6. On the 7th ring, it picked up. Silence for 1 second. Then a voice, but not Marco's. A voice he didn't recognize, flat and unhurried. "He's fine. For now. How fast can you make decisions, Mr. Moretti?" Damien stood in the dark outside a building where Elena was being held, with Vanessa beside him, and the knowledge that Cordell Pier was where he needed to be, and that simultaneously, in a safe house across the city, his daughter was behind a locked door with a compromised location and a man on the phone who was asking how fast he could make decisions. The answer, always, had been, "faster than you." Tonight he wasn't sure that was true, and that uncertainty, the first genuine uncertainty he had felt in years, was the most dangerous thing in the room. The voice on the phone was waiting. Damien stood in the dark outside the Cordell Pier facility With the cold off the water moving through his jacket and his daughter's photograph on his phone screen and a man he didn't recognize telling him to make decisions fast. And he did the thing that every instinct in his body was screaming against. He was still. Completely still. 3 seconds of absolute stillness, while his mind moved at a speed his body couldn't match, sorting variables, calculating distances, running the geometry of a situation that had 2 critical points separated by 12 minutes of city and no clean way to be at both simultaneously. Elena was inside the building in front of him. Lily was in the safe house across the city with Marco unconscious or incapacitated and a stranger on his phone. 1 man, 2 locations, 12 minutes between them. How fast? The voice on the phone repeated. Tell me what you want, Damien said. Come to the safe house, alone. You come, the girl stays comfortable. You send anyone else first, anyone at all, and we walk out with her. Walk out to where? That's a question you don't get answered until you're here. A pause. You have 20 minutes. After 20, we decide you're not coming. The call ended. Damien looked at Vanessa. She was watching him with the focused attention of a woman who had just heard one side of a conversation and was doing the same geometry he was. She didn't ask. She waited. Whatever she was now, architect, informant, something in between, she had the intelligence to know that this was not a moment for questions. Voss is inside, Damien said. Yes. How many men? When I last had communication, 4. But that was 90 minutes ago. He looked at the door. At the ground-level light, at the black car parked with its nose pointing out. He looked at his watch. He looked at the 12 minutes of city between here and Lily. He made the decision in 4 seconds. It was not a clean decision. It was the decision available to him, and he made it without sentiment and without the luxury of being certain it was right. He called Petrov. I need you at Cordell Pier in 7 minutes, he said. Eastern section, south face entry. There is a woman inside named Elena Cross. You bring her out. Whatever it takes, whatever it costs. You bring her out, and you bring her to Marco's location. Marco's location is compromised, Petrov said immediately. I know. That's why you're going to clear it first. He paused. Call Riordan. Get his crew off whatever they're doing and move them to the safe house address. Tell them there are hostile actors inside the perimeter. Tell them there is a child inside who does not get touched. His voice dropped on the last sentence to a register that required no elaboration. I'm going to the safe house. I need Elena extracted before I arrive. Damien, if I take men into that building, then take them. He ended the call. He looked at Vanessa one more time. She was standing with her arms at her sides, her cream-colored dress entirely wrong for the environment, for the dark, for the industrial smell, for the corrugated metal and pier water, and the specific quality of a situation in which people were about to be hurt. She looked wrong for all of it, and she was still standing in it, which told him something he filed without yet knowing what to do with it. Go home, he said. I can help. You have helped enough for one evening. He turned toward his car. If Petrov's people come out of that building with Elena and she is not intact, I will have a very thorough conversation with you about every decision you made over the last 3 years. Do you understand me? Yes, she said. Good. He moved. Go home, Vanessa. He was in the car before she had processed the end of the sentence, and the car was moving before the door was fully closed, and the city opened up ahead of them, east to west this time, reversing the geography of the evening, the pier district giving way to the transitional blocks, the lighting thickening, the streets filling back up with the ordinary traffic of a city that did not know and would not know what was passing through it. 11 minutes. He used 3 of them on the phone with Riordan, who was already moving, who had 4 men within 6 blocks of the safe house because Riordan's crew operated in the Western District as a baseline, and because Damien had not disassembled his operational infrastructure even on a day that was supposed to be a wedding. He used 2 more minutes with Costa's secondary, a man named Bryce, who had worked adjacent to Costa for 6 years, and whose loyalty Damien was now betting on the logic of not yet being implicated. He told Bryce to locate Costa and hold him. He used the language that meant hold him permanently, if necessary, and Bryce, to his credit, did not ask clarifying questions. The remaining 6 minutes he sat in silence. He thought about Marco. Marco with his bad knee and his patience and his willingness to teach card games to a child he'd met 3 hours ago. He thought about what incapacitated meant, whether it was a zip tie in a locked room or something worse, and he made himself stop thinking about it because the variable was outside his control for the next 6 minutes, and spending cognitive resources on uncontrollable variables was how you arrived at the controllable ones already depleted. He thought about Lily asleep in that chair. He thought about the photograph, the angle of it, from outside the window, looking in and slightly down, which meant whoever took it was at ground level, which meant the window was at or near ground level, which was consistent with the safe house layout. The room on the east side of the fourth floor had a window that looked out onto a fire escape that ran down to a service alley. Someone had been on that fire escape, had stood on the metal grating 3 feet from where his daughter slept and taken her photograph and sent it to him as a message. And the message was not just "we know where she is," but "we were close enough to touch her, and we didn't, yet." And that "yet" is your leverage and also your leash. The car stopped. The safe house building materialized in the windshield. 8 stories of converted textile. The ground floor loading bays dark. The upper floor windows mostly unlit except for the 4th floor east side where a light was still on. His light. Lily's light. Reardon's men were nowhere visible. That was correct. That was what he'd told them. Don't be visible. He got out of the car. He went in through the main entrance, which was unlocked, which meant someone had unlocked it from the inside, which meant they were already in the building and had been for long enough to manage the lock. The stairwell was dark. He took it at a controlled pace, not running, which made noise and cost breath, moving up through the industrial smell of the building, 4 flights, the metal stair rail cold under his hand. 4th floor landing. The door to the hallway was open, propped, a chair wedged against it, the specific improvised measure of people who expected to move quickly and didn't want doors impeding them. The hallway ran 40 feet to the safe house door, which was also open. He stood at the landing and looked at the open door 40 feet away. He walked toward it. The safe house room was lit by the single overhead lamp that had been on when he'd left. The table where Lily had slept over her cards was in the center. Marco's jacket was on the floor. The cards were scattered, not the neat spread of someone who had arranged them intentionally, but the random scatter of something having been moved fast and roughly. Marco was against the far wall. He was seated on the floor, back against the wall, wrists bound behind him with zip ties, a cut above his left ear that had bled significantly down the side of his face and into his collar but appeared to have slowed. He was conscious. His eyes found Damien immediately with the specific focus of a man who has been waiting and has things to say. There were 2 men in the room, one near the window, medium height, dark jacket, the particular stillness of someone whose job is covering an exit. One by the table, taller, broader, holding a phone loosely in his left hand with the ease of a man who had recently used it and had not yet put it away. The taller one looked at Damien when he came through the door. 20 minutes, he said. You made it with 4 to spare. Where's the girl? Damien said. Safe. Nearby. He tilted his head toward the window. You came alone? I came alone. Good. He gestured toward the chair at this table. Marco's chair, where Lily had sat. Sit down. Damien did not sit down. He stood in the doorway and looked at the room and calculated the distances. The man by the window was 12 feet away and slightly behind his right shoulder, a coverage position designed to prevent exit and provide backup. The tall man was 8 feet ahead and center. Marco was on the floor to the left, bound, not a variable in terms of immediate action, but not out of the equation entirely because Marco was still functional and Marco understood the shorthand. Voss sent you, Damien said. Voss coordinates us, yes. And what does Voss want? The tall man's expression had the quality of someone delivering a prepared message. Not his message, but one he'd been given and had the competence to deliver accurately. He wants the Northern Territory contracts, the Linden accounts and everything attached to them, and he wants a signed transfer of the Marchetti legacy assets, the 3 properties in the Harbor District. He paused. He also wants assurance that tonight's events don't generate retaliation, formal, documented assurance. He wants me to sign over half my operation and then promise not to come after him for taking my daughter. That's an accurate summary. Damien looked at him. And if I don't, then the girl stays with us until you reconsider. The man's voice was professional. Not cruel, not heated. The specific neutral delivery of someone who is transmitting terms rather than making them. And the woman at the pier doesn't have much time. Voss's standing instructions there are time-sensitive. The mention of Elena landed with precise, deliberate effect. Voss had timed the message to arrive here, in this room, at this moment, with this framing, so that both variables were active simultaneously, and the pressure from each amplified the other. It was well constructed. Damien acknowledged that. "I want to see Lily," he said. "When you've agreed to the terms, I want to see her before I agree to anything." A pause. The tall man looked at the man by the window. A brief exchange, a micro-decision being made at a level slightly above the man's authority. Then he pulled his phone and sent a text. 40 seconds. Then he turned the phone screen toward Damien. A video. 10 seconds long. Lily in a room. Different from the safe house. Smaller, with a bare concrete floor and a light fixture overhead, sitting on a folded blanket with her rabbit. She was not crying. She was not performing calm either. It was the same real patience she had shown all day, the waiting she was genuinely good at, and watching it on a phone screen in a room with two hostile men and Marco bleeding against the wall was the closest Damien had come in years to losing the thing that kept him operational. He handed the phone back. "The Linden accounts," he said. "Those are not mine to transfer unilaterally. They're co-held with 3 other parties. Voss is aware. He wants your portion and your influence with the other parties. And the harbor properties, 2 of those are under active legal proceedings. I can't transfer them without triggering the proceedings." "Then resolve the proceedings." The tone had not changed. Patient. Prepared for negotiation, apparently. Voss had anticipated pushback on the mechanics, which meant he'd thought this through and considered the back and forth acceptable. He was comfortable with time. He was a man who had been patient for 14 months and could remain patient a while longer. That patience was the thing Damien needed to disrupt. "All right," he said. The word landed with an effect he watched carefully. The slight easing in the tall man's posture, the microscopic relaxation of the man by the window. The particular way prepared people responded to agreement after expecting continued resistance. A shift. Small, but real. "I need to make 3 calls," Damien said. "My attorney, my account manager, and one of the co-holders. Without those calls, I cannot produce anything Voss can actually use." "You can make the calls." "I need my phone and I need the room." "You don't get the room," the tall man said. "Make the calls here." "Fine." Damien moved toward the table. He pulled out his phone. He sat down in the chair, the same chair Lily had sat in, the same spot, and he put the phone on the table and looked at it. He made the first call. It was to a number labeled attorney in his contacts. It rang twice. The person who answered said, "This is Reardon." "I'm going to need you to prepare the Linden transfer documents," Damien said. His voice was entirely normal, businesslike. "Tonight, if possible. There are 2 men here who will need to confirm the process is underway." "Understood," Reardon said. "We're in position. On your signal." "Good," Damien said. "I'll be in touch with the specifics." He ended the call. He looked up at the tall man. "My attorney is preparing the documents. It will take 40 minutes minimum." He paused. "During those 40 minutes, I want Lily in this room." It's not a negotiating point," Damien said. "I have agreed to your terms. I am in the process of executing them. During that process, my daughter is in this room where I can see her. If Voss is operating in good faith, this costs him nothing." He held the man's gaze. "If he's not, then we are having a different conversation." The tall man looked at him for a long moment. Then he stepped back and made a call. While he was on the call, Damien looked at Marco. Marco's eyes were on him. Clear, focused, tracking everything. The cut above his ear had stopped bleeding. His hands were behind him, but his legs were in front of him, feet flat on the floor, weight slightly forward. Marco had positioned himself within the constraint of the zip ties for standing quickly. He had been doing it slowly, probably over the last several minutes, shifting his weight imperceptibly until he was in the best available position. 19 years of shorthand. Damien looked at the man by the window, then back at Marco. He held Marco's gaze for 1 second and moved his eyes left, toward the window man's position, then back to Marco. Marco's chin dropped 1 millimeter. The tall man finished his call. "She'll be here in 8 minutes." "Thank you," Damien said. He put his phone on the table. He looked at it. He made his second call, this one to Petrov's number, which he dialed slowly, deliberately, taking his time finding it in his contacts. Petrov answered. I need you to confirm the status on the harbor properties, Damien said. Elena is out, Petrov said quietly. 3 minutes ago. She's mobile. She's... A brief pause. She wants to talk to you. Put her on, Damien said in the same business-like tone. A sound on the line. Movement. Then a voice he had routed around for 6 years came through the phone and hit him with the specific physical force of a sound that bypasses cognition and lands somewhere older. Damien. Elena's voice was steady but rough. The roughness of someone who had been through something physical and had not yet had time to process it. I'm okay. I need you to know... Lily. I know where she is, he said. She's coming to me. 8 minutes. A breath on the line. Long. Okay. Another breath. Okay. Are you hurt? Nothing serious. A pause. Damien, Voss has... I know what Voss has, he said. I need you to go with Petrov's people right now. Don't argue. Don't come to the pier. Go with them. Where? Petrov knows. He paused. Elena. He stopped. There were things to say that had been waiting 6 years for the correct moment, and this was not the correct moment, and they both understood that simultaneously across the phone connection, and the understanding itself was something. Go with Petrov. Okay, she said. Okay. He ended the call. He put the phone on the table and looked at his hands on either side of it. The tall man had been listening with the evaluative attention of someone trying to determine whether the calls were genuine. The business-like tone had apparently satisfied him. No alarm registered in his posture. The man by the window had relaxed marginally. Not much. Enough. 4 minutes passed. Then footsteps in the hallway. 2 sets. One of them small, quick, the particular rhythm of a child who has been told to walk and is walking, but would prefer to run. Lily came through the door. She was holding the rabbit. She looked at the room, at the 2 men, at Marco against the wall, at Damien at the table, and she processed all of it in the rapid, unsentimental way she processed things, and then she crossed the room and stood beside Damien's chair. Are you okay? She asked him, not quietly, with the direct volume of a child who didn't see a reason to whisper. I'm okay, he said. Sit here. He moved his chair slightly, and she climbed into the adjacent space, leaning against his side, the rabbit between them. The third man who had brought Lily in, shorter, younger, posted himself near the door. Now there were 3 of them. The tall man center, the window man behind right, the doorman behind left. Marco on the floor to the left, Lily against his side. Damien put one hand on Lily's shoulder. With the other he sent a text, 1 word, now. The window exploded inward. Not glass, the frame, the entire frame, kicked through from the fire escape outside with the concentrated force of a large man who had been crouched on metal grating waiting for a signal. Reardon's man came through it at the same moment that Reardon's second man came through the hallway door from the left, and the room went from 5 people to 7 in under 2 seconds, and the geometry of it changed completely. Damien was already moving. He had Lily off the chair and against the near wall in one motion, behind him, below the line of the window, protected by the table's bulk, before the tall man had completed his turn toward the window disruption. The tall man was fast, his hand moving to his jacket, but fast is relative, and Damien was already crossing the 8 feet between them with the focused, economical violence of a man who had not forgotten how this worked, no matter how many years of suits and boardrooms and calculated stillness had passed over the top of it. He hit the tall man twice, once to disrupt the draw, once to end the conversation. And the man went down with the graceless heaviness of someone who had not expected contact. Behind him, the sounds of the room were the sounds of a room being resolved by force. Reardon's men were professionals. The window man was being handled. And then from the floor, Marco had used the distraction to get to his feet and was removing the zip tie situation against the wall edge with the focused aggression of a man who had been waiting for this for the better part of an hour and was not in a forgiving mood. 30 seconds. Then the room was quiet. Damien turned to the wall where Lily was. She was crouched with her back flat against it, the rabbit held tight, watching the room with those eyes, dark, amber-flecked, taking everything in, not crying, not screaming, watching. He crossed to her and crouched down. "It's okay," he said. "I know," she said. She looked at the tall man on the floor. "Is he dead?" "No." "Okay?" She looked back at Damien. "Can we go now?" "Yes," he said. "We're going to go find your mama." Something moved across her face. Not surprise, not relief exactly, but the particular expression of a child receiving confirmation of something they had been hoping for without quite letting themselves hope for it. Her grip on the rabbit tightened and then slowly released. "She's okay?" Lily asked. "She's okay." Marco appeared at his shoulder, wiping the blood from the side of his face with his sleeve, his expression carrying the specific combination of pain and irritation of a man who had been hit in the head and was not pleased about it. "Car's downstairs. Reardon has a second team on the Voss location." "Voss," Damien said. "Still at the pier. He hasn't moved. He's waiting for confirmation from his men here." Marco paused. "When that confirmation doesn't come, he'll know." Damien looked at the door. "How much time before he understands what happened here?" "Minutes, maybe less." "Then we move." He picked Lily up. She settled against his shoulder with the ease she had shown the first time, that same muscle memory, that same fit, and he moved toward the door and the hallway and the stairwell, with Marco behind him and Reardon's men securing the room, and the thought of Voss at the pier, of Voss receiving silence from three men who should have confirmed terms and were not confirming anything, of Voss making the calculation that follows silence. That thought sat in the front of his mind like a lit fuse. Voss had Elena's location. He didn't have Elena anymore, Petrov had her out, but he had the location and the infrastructure and the specific knowledge that tonight had gone wrong for him in ways that were not recoverable without direct action. A man like Voss, in a position like the one he was now in, with the resources he had available and the knowledge that the window was closing, a man like that did not wait. The car was at the curb when they came out. Damien put Lily in the back seat. He looked at Marco over the roof. "Where is Elena right now?" he asked. Marco checked his phone. "Petrov has her 2 miles north of the pier, moving." "Moving toward what?" "Petrov's staging point, a location he uses for, I know where Petrov stages." He looked south toward the invisible geography of the pier district. "Call Reardon. Tell him to hold his teams off Voss." Marco stared at him. "Hold them off?" "Yes." "Damien, if we hold them off, Voss has time to—" "I'm going to the pier," Damien said. Marco was quiet for 2 full seconds. "Alone." "Voss has been running this for 14 months. He has Gio, he has Costa, he had Vanessa, he's had eyes in my organization for over a year. If I send a team in, he burns everything and disappears, and 2 years from now this happens again with a different name on it." He held Marco's gaze across the roof. "I need him to know it's over, not for a report, not for a transfer of assets. I need him to understand what finished looks like, and I need to be the one standing in front of him when he understands it." Marco did not say the word alone again. He understood the thing being communicated. Not recklessness, not rage, something more deliberate. The kind of deliberate that had its own logic, even if the logic was uncomfortable. "Lily goes to Elena," Damien said. "You take her. I need to know they're together before I walk through that door." "Okay," Marco said. "Marco." He stopped, looked at his friend over the roof of the car in the dark street. "If something goes wrong at the pier—" "Don't finish that sentence," Marco said. "I need you to—" "I know what you need," Marco said. "I've known what you need in situations like this for 19 years. Don't finish the sentence." He opened the driver's door. "I'll get her to Elena." Damien looked into the back seat. Lily was buckled in, the rabbit in her lap, looking at him through the window glass with the patient, absolute certainty of a child who had decided she trusted this specific person and was not revising that decision. He pressed his hand flat against the window glass for a moment. She put her small hand on the other side of it. Then he stepped back and Marco pulled away from the curb, and the car moved north with his daughter inside it, and Damien turned south, toward the water, toward the pier district, toward a building where a man named Harlan Voss was standing in the dark, with the knowledge that his 14 months of careful construction had come apart in a single evening and was calculating what came next. Damien walked. The city narrowed around him as he moved south. Fewer pedestrians, more industrial space, the streets widening and emptying, the smell of the pier thickening in the air. He moved at a pace that was not hurried but not slow, the pace of a man who had made his decision and was now simply closing the distance between where he was and where it would be executed. His phone buzzed once. Petrov. Both secure. Waiting. He put the phone in his pocket. The Cordell Pier facility materialized ahead, the corrugated roof, the loading bay lights on the west side, the eastern section dark except for the single ground-level light that was still burning at the south entry door. The black car with no plates was still parked outside it. The door was open. Voss was standing in the doorway. He was a man of about 60, narrow through the shoulders, with the kind of angular face that photographs as intelligent and reads in person as watchful. He was wearing a jacket that cost real money and holding nothing in his hands. He looked at Damien approaching across the open ground between the fence line and the building, and he did not move. He had known he was coming. Of course he had. Silence from his men, no confirmation of terms, and then nothing from the safe house. Voss was not a man who waited for conclusions when he could calculate them. He had known Damien was coming, and he was standing in the doorway waiting because the alternative was running, and Harlan Voss, whatever else he was, had apparently decided he was not going to run. Damien stopped 6 feet away. They looked at each other in the ground-level light, in the dark and the pier smell, with the sound of the water somewhere behind the building and the distant mechanical sound of the active loading on the west side, continuous and indifferent. "Elena is gone," Damien said. "I know," Voss said. "My daughter is with her." "I know that too." "Your men at the safe house are with Riordan's people." Pause. "Gio is with Costa, except Costa is with Bryce." He watched Voss's face on the name, a slight contraction, quickly controlled. "Your financial architecture for the last 3 years is in Petrov's hands. By morning, the accounts that have been feeding your operation will be frozen." He paused. "You have nothing left to trade." Voss looked at him. Something in his face moved. Not fear, not the performance of composure either, but the real and complicated expression of a man who had built something over years and was watching it conclude, and was finding the conclusion both worse and somehow less terrible than the building had been. "I underestimated your timeline, Shek," he said. "I had planned for 3 more days." "What happens in 3 days?" The Linden accounts would have been inaccessible. The harbor properties would have transferred under the legal proceedings I'd initiated. You would have had nothing to freeze. He paused. "I was 3 days from having restructured your organization from the outside without ever walking through a single door." He said it without pride, as plain information, the assessment of a professional reviewing work that would not be completed. 3 days, Damien said. "Yes." "Why Elena? 6 years ago. Why manufacture the evidence? Why not just take what you wanted from the organization without destroying my marriage first?" Voss looked at him. Something shifted in the watchful face. Something older. "Elena had already found the discrepancy," he said, "in the Marchetti financial flows. She had found it, and she had documented it, and she had brought it to Gio. Not knowing what Gio was. She brought it to him because she trusted him." He paused. "Gio brought it to me. I had 72 hours to construct a response before Elena went further." His voice was flat, not apologetic, explaining. "The fastest response available was to discredit her completely and ensure that anything she said afterward was interpreted as the claims of a disloyal wife manufacturing evidence against a husband who had divorced her." He looked at Damien. "Gio said you'd believe it. He said there was one thing you couldn't calculate clearly, and it was her." The word landed in the air between them. He was right. The cold moved through Damien again, the managed cold, the controlled current. He let it pass. "And the child," he said. "You knew about Lily." "We knew Elena was pregnant when she disappeared. We didn't know she'd kept the child." A pause. "That was a miscalculation." He said it the way engineers said it when a load-bearing element had failed, not with guilt, but with the specific dissatisfaction of an incorrect assumption. "We assumed she would end the pregnancy given the circumstances. She didn't, and then she raised the girl alone and apparently prepared her over 6 years for exactly what she did this morning." He paused. "I underestimated her also." The sound of the water, the mechanical sound from the west side. Somewhere in the building behind Voss, a light flickered. There is one more thing, Voss said. Damien waited. I have a file, Voss said. Complete documentation of every transaction, every instruction, every communication in the 14 months of the operation, every person involved, every decision, every source of funding. He reached into his jacket, slowly, the gesture of a man demonstrating that he understands the room, and produced a phone. It exists on this device and in one other location. I am offering you the device. In exchange for what? In exchange for the understanding that I walk away from this pier tonight and you do not come after me. He held the phone out. Not placating. A transaction. The gesture of a man who had decided that the most valuable thing remaining to him was the next several years of his life and was pricing it accurately. The file gives you everything you need to dismantle the operation completely. Every name, every account, every instruction. You will be able to prove what was done to Elena. You will be able to prove what was done to your marriage. He paused. Everything Gio and Costa built, and everything I helped them build. It's on that device. Damien looked at the phone. And the second location, he said, where the file also exists. Voss looked at him. That location becomes inaccessible in 24 hours, regardless of what happens to me. Damien looked at the phone in Voss's outstretched hand. He looked at the man holding it, 60 years old, narrow-shouldered, watchful, standing in a doorway with nothing left behind him, and a transaction in front of him, and the specific, undecorated dignity of a man who had decided how this ended and was holding that decision. He took the phone. He put it in his pocket. Voss lowered his hand. He looked at Damien with the evaluative attention of someone confirming that a term has been accepted. One more thing, Damien said. Voss waited. Gio told you there was one thing I couldn't calculate clearly. He looked at Voss steadily. He was right. 6 years ago, he was right. He paused. He's not right anymore. He turned and walked away from the building. Behind him, he heard Voss remain in the doorway for a moment. The sound of a man standing still in a concluded situation, and then the soft sound of footsteps moving in the opposite direction, into the dark of the pier and whatever came after it for a man who had just traded everything he'd built for the next several years of his life. Damien walked north. His phone was in his hand before he'd cleared the fence line. He dialed. It rang once. Both of them are here, Marco said. They're together. Something happened in his chest that he did not immediately have a category for. He kept walking. I'm coming, he said. Damien. Marco's voice had something in it, something thick that Marco would not have wanted to name and that Damien would not have named for him. She's been talking to Lily for 20 minutes. They're okay. They're really okay. He stopped walking for 1 second, just one. The city around him, the pier smell behind him, the lights of the northern district ahead. I'm coming, he said again, and he meant it the way a man means something when he has been walking away from it for 6 years without knowing he was walking away, and has finally turned around and can see the distance he has to cover, and is not afraid of it but is something more complicated than not afraid. Is ready, which is different, which costs more, which means something that the word ready doesn't quite hold but is the closest word available. He walked north through the city toward the people who were waiting, and the file in his pocket contained the names of everyone who had built the last 6 years of his life for him without his knowledge. And tomorrow those names would be answered for, but tonight was not tomorrow. And the 20 minutes between where he was standing and where Marco's car was parked was the only geography that mattered now. 20 minutes. He had been waiting 6 years. 20 minutes was nothing. The room Petrov had staged in was a converted office space above a dry cleaning business on Varnell Street. 2 rooms, a bathroom, a window that faced north toward the better part of the city. It smelled like solvent and old carpet, and the particular staleness of a space that had been closed for a long time and opened quickly. There was a couch that had seen better decades, and a folding table with 2 chairs and a lamp on the floor because there was no surface tall enough to put it on that hadn't been moved to make space. Elena was sitting on the couch. Lily was asleep against her side with the rabbit pressed between them, and Elena's left arm was around her daughter's shoulders, and her right hand was in her lap, and she was not asleep. She was sitting completely still in the way of someone who has been in motion for a very long time and has just stopped and is not yet certain that stopping is safe, that the stillness will hold, that no one is coming through the door. Marco was in the second room. She could hear him on the phone, the low rumble of his voice through the wall, not the words. Petrov had left 20 minutes ago. Two of his people remained in the hallway outside. She heard footsteps on the stairwell. She heard them the way she had learned to hear footsteps over 6 years of living in spaces where footsteps mattered, with the full body, not just the ears. She felt her arm tighten involuntarily around Lily's shoulders, felt Lily shift slightly in sleep without waking, felt the specific physiological preparation that her nervous system had run so many times it had become reflex. Breath held, weight shifted, eyes on the door. The door opened. Damien stood in it. He was still in the charcoal suit. It had been a wedding suit 12 hours ago, and now it was something else. The jacket was open, the collar was undone, there was a mark on the left sleeve that was probably someone else's blood, and he was standing in the doorway of a room above a dry cleaning business, looking at her with the specific expression of a man who has arrived somewhere after a very long journey and is not yet sure he has permission to be there. They looked at each other. 6 years is a particular length of time, long enough to construct an alternate life on top of the ruins of a previous one, long enough to stop expecting a thing and start managing the absence of it instead, long enough that the person standing in the doorway is not quite the person you knew, is carrying 6 years of their own weight in their face and their posture and the way they hold their hands, and you are not quite the person they knew either, and the distance between who you were and who you are now is the real thing that has to be crossed, and it has no map. Elena said nothing. He came into the room. He sat in the folding chair across from the couch, not beside her, not close, the chair across, 6 feet of space between them, which was the right distance for two people who had 6 years of unsaid things to work through before the distance could change. He looked at Lily sleeping. He looked at the rabbit. He looked at Elena. She didn't stop, Elena said. Her voice was rough, used. She walked straight down that aisle, and she didn't stop once. A pause. I told her what you looked like. She had photographs. I kept photographs. I told her if something happened to me, she had to find you. She stopped. I didn't plan for it to be your wedding. It wasn't a real wedding, Damien said. I know what Vanessa was. She looked at her hands in her lap. I found out about her 8 months ago. I'd been piecing things together for 2 years. Who was behind the evidence, how the chain ran. When I found Vanessa's name, I understood the whole construction. I came back because... She stopped. I came back because I had enough. Documentation, financial records, the relay communications, enough to prove what was done. She paused. I came back because Lily was 6 years old and she had never had a father, and she was asking questions I didn't know how to answer anymore. Damien looked at her steadily. You should have come to me directly. Should I have? Not a question. A statement carrying 6 years of weight. You believed the evidence, Damien. You saw it, and you decided in 72 hours. You didn't call me. You didn't ask. You sent the papers through an attorney, and you were done. Her voice was not raised. It was the quieter and more damaging version of the same thing. Controlled, but with the specific control of someone who has had a very long time to feel something and has organized the feeling into language that does not require volume to penetrate. You were done with me in 72 hours. He did not look away. Yes. So no, she said. I didn't come to you directly because I had done that calculation before and I knew what the answer was. The room was quiet. The sounds of the city outside the window, distant, indifferent, the city doing what it always did. The low sound of Marco's voice through the wall, still on the phone. You're right, Damien said. She looked at him. I made the fastest decision of my life about the most permanent thing in my life, he said, and I made it badly. I had evidence, and I had men I trusted telling me the evidence was real, and I had 72 hours of almost no sleep, and He stopped. He looked at his hands, then back at her. I used the decision as a way to stop feeling something I didn't know how to feel. You were the one thing I couldn't calculate, and that frightened me, and when the evidence appeared I used it, not consciously, but that is what I did. He paused. I'm not asking you to accept that as an explanation. It's not an explanation. It's a confession. Elena sat with it. She looked at Lily sleeping against her side. She looked at the rabbit. She breathed. She talks about you, Elena said. Her voice had shifted. The control was still there, but something beneath it had opened, slightly. the way a window opens when the pressure outside finally matches the pressure inside. She has talked about you her whole life. I told her the truth, that her father was someone who didn't know she existed, who had been kept from her by people who made very bad decisions. I didn't tell her you abandoned her. I was very careful about that. She looked at him. Because I didn't believe you had. I believed you were lied to the same way I was lied to, and I wanted her to have a father she could find someday, not a story about a man who didn't want her. A pause. That was the hardest thing, keeping that door open for her when every day I was living with what closing it would have felt like. Damien's jaw moved slightly, the small contraction of a man holding something in. That cost you something, he said. Everything has a cost, she said. I picked the one I could live with. From the second room, Marco's voice went quiet. A moment later, he appeared in the doorway, looked at the room, read it, and withdrew without a word. The hallway door opened and closed softly behind him. Whatever call he was on, he'd taken it downstairs. The room was just the three of them now. Damien in the folding chair, Elena on the couch. Lily sleeping between them in the specific, trusting way of children who have decided the immediate environment is safe, completely, openly, without the guarded quality of a child who is uncertain. What did Voss give you? Elena said. A file. Complete documentation of everything. The original evidence fabrication. The financial chain. Every communication in the operation for 14 months. Gio's involvement going back to the Marchetti period. He paused. Vanessa's involvement. Her server. Her communications with Voss. The timeline of when she entered the picture and why. Why? Elena said. Why Vanessa? What was she after? She was recruited, he said. Gio recruited her. Or more accurately, created conditions in which she encountered him through a chain of introductions that appeared organic. She was positioned to get close to me, report information, and eventually establish a relationship that gave Gio proximity to my decisions through a channel I wouldn't think to audit. He paused. She was a tool. She knew it, and she did it anyway because the alternative was consequences from Gio that she had assessed as worse than the job. And then she called you tonight and told you about the device in her office. And redirected my attention to Gio. He nodded. Yes. She's not innocent. No, he said. She's not. But she's also not the architect. He looked at his hands again. The file has everything. I'm giving it to an attorney tomorrow, not one connected to my organization, an independent firm. Whatever proceedings follow from it, they follow. Elena looked at him. Something shifted in her expression, careful, assessing. That's not how you normally handle things. No, he said. It's not. The statement sat in the air between them. They both understood what it was. Not a speech, not a declaration, but a fact that pointed in a direction. A changed fact about a changed man, offered without framing, with the understanding that she could evaluate it herself. She said, after a moment, Lily asked me once what you did for work. She was 4. She'd been asking about you more. She goes through cycles. A pause. I told her you were a businessman. She asked if you helped people. I said that was complicated. She looked at Lily's sleeping face. She thought about it for a while and then she said, maybe he'll help people when he figures out how. She was 4 years old. She paused. She had more patience for you than I did. Something moved through Damien's face, gone quickly, but real. She's extraordinary, he said. I know, Elena said. She's been the only good thing about the last 6 years, and she's been completely enough. She looked at him. I want you to understand that. I am not here because I needed rescuing. I came back with documentation and a plan. What happened today? The timing of it, Voss moving faster than I expected. That was a variable I didn't account for. But I was not waiting for you to save me. I know, Damien said. I want to be very clear about that. You are very clear, he said. You have always been very clear. It is one of the things He stopped. It was one of the things I valued when I was capable of valuing things clearly. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked down at Lily, and her hand moved, a small adjustment, pulling her daughter closer with the unconscious ease of 6 years of doing exactly that, of being the single gravitational point in a small life. What happens to Gio, she said. Whatever the law produces. And what it doesn't produce, the organization will. He paused. He's finished either way. Costa. Same. Vanessa. He was quiet for a moment. The file implicates her specifically in obstructing your ability to surface with documentation. Whatever a prosecutor does with that is outside my control. Personally, he paused. I don't have the energy to pursue Vanessa Hale beyond what the file enables. She was used, and she used the situation. The people who used her will answer for more. Elena nodded slowly. And Voss? Gone. He looked at the window. He'll stay gone. He has enough left to disappear with, and the file makes coming back the kind of risk he won't take. You let him walk. I took what he had. He looked back at her. The file is worth more than whatever satisfaction a different outcome would have produced. She studied him. That's a different calculation than the one you would have made 6 years ago. Yes, he said, it is. The night had moved past its center. It was the hour past midnight when the city's noise thinned and the darkness had a different quality, not oppressive but honest. The dark that preceded the next thing, rather than followed the last one. Lily's breathing was the steadiest sound in the room. Outside, a car passed and didn't stop. Damien looked at his daughter sleeping. She needs a school, he said, a consistent one. She's been moving too much. I don't know the full history, but from what she's told me today, the movement has been significant. Elena's expression flickered, the specific flicker of someone who has just been handed a practical concern instead of an emotional one and is briefly thrown by the gear shift. She has been to 4 schools in 3 years, she said. We moved as necessary. She won't have to move anymore. Damien, I'm not making a demand, he said. I'm stating a fact. Whatever you decide about the rest of it, about what any of this becomes, the movement is over. You and Lily can be in one place. I will make that possible regardless of what else is or isn't between us. I mean that wherever you and Lily are, I am going to be present. As her father. As whatever I can be to you, over time, as you decide what that is. He held her gaze. I'm done calculating the things that matter. The room was quiet for a long time after that. Not the strained quiet of 2 people avoiding something, but the different quiet that follows when the central thing has been said and the air has gone out of the pressure that had been holding everything at distance. Lily shifted in her sleep. She made a small sound, not distress, the sound of a sleeping child adjusting, and her hand found Elena's sleeve and held on without waking. Elena looked down at her. Then she looked at Damien. She asked me the night before yesterday what she should call you, she said. She said, if I find him, what do I call him? And I said, she stopped. The control in her voice wavered briefly, the single break in 6 years of holding things together, there and then recovered. I said, start with his name. You don't have to decide the rest right away. And she didn't start with his name, Damien said. No, Elena said. She didn't. He looked at Lily's sleeping face, at the rabbit tucked between them, at the pale blue dress, still on, that she had worn through the entire impossible day without complaint, at the face that was his face and Elena's face, and neither, and both. A separate person, utterly new, carrying the evidence of 2 people who had loved each other and been separated by people who made bad decisions for selfish reasons, and who had taken that complicated inheritance and made herself patient and brave and capable of walking into a room full of strangers and doing the one thing that needed doing. I'm going to earn it, he said. The word. The file goes to the attorney at 8. Petrov needs instruction on the accounts. Reardon's men need releasing from the current situation. He paused. There's a lot to dismantle. And after it's dismantled, he looked at her. That's the question I'm building toward, he said. The answer is going to take some time. A pause. But it's the first time in a long time that I've wanted to be building toward something. She held his gaze. Come back in the morning, she said. Lily will want to see you. And you? He asked. Not with pressure, with the particular careful attention of a man who understood that the question had to be asked, and the answer had to come freely, and pressuring it would cost more than asking it. She looked at him for a long moment. And me, she said. He nodded. He looked at Lily one more time, at the sleeping face, the closed eyes, the hand still holding Elena's sleeve. Then he walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame. Elena. He didn't turn around. What you said to her? About keeping the door open for her. about making sure she could find a father instead of a story about a man who didn't want her. He stopped. That was... He stopped again. I don't have a word for what that was, but I know what it cost, and I know what I owe you for it. She said nothing. He didn't wait for a response. He went through the door and down the stairs and out into the street. The city was very quiet at this hour, the streets nearly empty, the traffic signals cycling through their changes for no one, green to amber to red and back again with the patient, mechanical indifference of a system designed to manage more than was currently present. I thought about Vanessa in the Caldwell house, wherever she actually was, rebuilding her read of the evening's events, and arriving at the conclusion that the documentation she'd been part of was no longer her private problem. He thought about Voss somewhere in the city or already outside it, moving with the economical speed of a man who had bought himself the next several years and intended to use them. He thought about what came after the dismantling. He had said it to Elena, the answer is going to take some time. And it was true, but it was also the first time in years that the future felt like territory rather than projection, something that could be inhabited rather than just managed. He had been managing Forward for 6 years, managing the organization, managing Vanessa, managing the careful blankness he had applied to the territory marked Elena so that he could function in its vicinity without the collapse that visiting it directly would have produced. He had not been living Forward. He had been administering Forward. The difference, standing in a nighttime street after the longest day of his adult life, was very clear. 4 months later, the organization was different, not gone. It had not evaporated with the goodwill of a man who had decided to change. It had contracted, restructured, shed the parts that required the kind of violence that had defined it, and the remainder had been redirected toward the thing that Damien had, after a significant amount of time with attorneys and accountants and men who built things instead of threatening them, decided to build instead. The company was called Meridian Protection Group. Not subtle. He had used the name deliberately, a reference to the ballroom, a reference to where Lily had walked an aisle and changed everything. The work was security, corporate, private, the protection of people who were being threatened by the kinds of organizations Damien had spent 20 years inside. He understood those organizations from the inside out. He understood their methods, their pressures, their weaknesses. That understanding, transferred to a different purpose, was worth more than anything he had built before. It was also, he had found, the kind of work he was not ashamed of. Gio and Costa were in pre-trial proceedings. The file had produced exactly what Petrov said it would, a complete chain of evidence that no attorney could adequately argue around. Vanessa Hale had retained the most expensive defense counsel in the city and was cooperating with prosecutors in the specifically targeted way of a woman who had read the file and understood that cooperation was now her best asset. She had not contacted Damien since the night at the pier. He had not contacted her. Voss was not in the city. Voss was not, as far as Petrov's people could determine, in the country. The file had been used to freeze his accessible accounts and dismantle the operational infrastructure he'd built over 14 months. What remained of Voss was a man somewhere with enough liquid resources to live quietly and enough intelligence to understand that coming back was not an option. Damien assessed this as an acceptable conclusion. Elena lived in a house on Brentley Street, 12 minutes from the Meridian Protection Group offices. She had chosen the house herself, had gone with a real estate agent and spent 2 weekends looking, and had selected it with the deliberate autonomy of a woman who had made every major decision alone for 6 years and was not going to stop making decisions alone simply because the conditions of her life had changed. It had a small yard. Lily had wanted a yard. The yard had a tree that was appropriate for climbing, which Lily had assessed on the first visit and approved. Damien had offered to pay. Elena had declined. He had offered again. She had declined again with greater precision. He had understood and had not offered a third time. He was there on Tuesday evenings and Saturday mornings and some Sundays, and occasionally on other days for no scheduled reason, and the frequency had increased naturally over 4 months without either of them announcing the increase or negotiating it. It had simply happened, the way things happened when they were allowed to happen without too much management. He and Elena had talked. A lot, over 4 months. Some of it was practical. Lily's school, the legal proceedings, the restructuring. Some of it was not practical at all, was the 6 years of accumulated things that needed to be said and heard and sat with, And those conversations were slower and harder, and on two occasions had ended with one of them walking out of the kitchen and both of them sitting separately for an hour before coming back. But they came back, both times. He did not ask her for more than was being offered. Understood was the clarity that had replaced his former talent for managing around uncomfortable territory, that what was being rebuilt was not the same thing that had been destroyed. It was something new, something that incorporated the destruction, the way scar tissue incorporated injury, something stronger in some ways and permanently different in others. And the building of it required patience. He was still learning, and honesty he was still practicing. She kissed him first, 3 months after Brentley Street. In the kitchen, after a Tuesday evening when Lily had gone to bed and they had been cleaning up the dinner dishes in the specific comfortable silence that had been developing between them, and she had turned and looked at him for a moment, and then crossed the 2 feet of kitchen between them and kissed him with the deliberate plainness of a woman who had decided something and was executing the decision. He had been very still. Then he had kissed her back. Afterward, she had looked at him and said, "That's not an answer to everything." "I know," he had said. "It just needed to happen." "Yes," he had said. "We still have a lot to work through." "We do," he had said. She had nodded and turned back to the dishes. He had picked up a towel and dried the dishes she washed, and they had finished the kitchen in silence, and he had gone home at 11, and they had not talked about it the next day or the day after. And the not talking about it was not avoidance, but the particular space that two people leave around a new thing when they understand that the new thing needs air before it needs definition. The school ceremony was on a Thursday in early spring. Lily's class had been working on a presentation about local history, a joint project, the teacher had explained in the note sent home, involving research and a short public presentation that the families were invited to attend. The school was a 20-minute drive from Brentley Street. Elena had told Damien about it 2 weeks in advance, in the specific way of someone who is not asking but is including, which he had received correctly and confirmed he would be there. He arrived before the ceremony started. He sat with Elena in the 3rd row of folding chairs arranged in the school gymnasium. She was wearing a jacket the color of dark teal over a white shirt, and her hair was loose. She smelled like the soap she used, which he had memorized without deciding to over the course of 4 months of Tuesday evenings and Saturday mornings. She sat beside him with her bag in her lap, and her eyes on the small stage at the front of the gymnasium, where children were arranging themselves with the studied seriousness of people who have been rehearsing. He looked for Lily. She was at the left side of the group, 3rd from the end, in a yellow dress, her dark hair pulled back. She was holding a piece of paper with her notes on it. He could see the paper, the way she held it, slightly too tight, which was her tell when she was managing nerves, a tell he had identified over 4 months of Saturday mornings and filed. She found him in the 3rd row. Across the gymnasium, she found him. In the crowd of parents and guardians arranged on folding chairs, she found him immediately, with the same instinctive directness she had used to walk down a wedding aisle 4 months ago. She looked at him. Then she looked at Elena beside him, then back at him. She held up the hand with the notes in it. A small wave. Not the wave of a child performing for an audience. The specific, private wave of a child locating her person in a room and confirming that they are present. He lifted his hand, one small gesture back. She went back to looking at her paper. The ceremony was 40 minutes. Lily's group presented on the industrial history of the Harbor District, which Damien appreciated for the specific irony of it and kept to himself. When it was Lily's turn to speak, 30 seconds, her portion of the shared presentation, she stood at the edge of the small stage and looked at her notes, and then looked up and spoke without them, in the clear, direct way she did everything, about the workers who had built the Pier District in the early part of the previous century, and what they had been trying to build, and whether they had known their work would last. She did not look at the crowd while she spoke. She looked at her notes, held now in both hands, and she delivered the words she had prepared. When she finished, she looked up, and she looked directly at Damien and Elena in the 3rd row, and her expression was the expression of someone who has done a thing they had prepared to do and is waiting to see if the preparation was enough. He nodded. Once, small. She exhaled, and her face, the controlled, patient, watchful face that she wore through most of the world, opened briefly into something unguarded and young and purely pleased, the expression of a 6-year-old girl who had worked very hard at something and knew that the person she most needed to see had seen it. Then she recovered and looked back at her paper, and the next child began to speak. When it was over, she ran. Not a performance. The simple contact of a person who is standing beside another person and has chosen to be there. He stood in the school gymnasium on a Thursday in early spring with his daughter in his arms and Elena's hand on his back and the noise of 40 families around them, and the past was still the past. It did not disappear. The 6 years did not unhappen. The things done and not done were still in the record exactly as they had occurred. That was true. And it was also true that he was here, that she was here, that Lily was here, that the file was in the attorney's hands and the proceedings were running, and the organization he had spent 20 years building was already becoming something else, something that helped, instead of threatened, something he could explain to his daughter someday in a way that did not require him to omit the most important parts. He thought about what Lily had said to Elena at 4 years old. Maybe he'll help people when he figures out how. He had spent 4 more years figuring out how. He set Lily down. She looked up at him with the amber-flecked dark eyes that were his eyes and Elena's eyes and nobody else's in the world. "You were good up there," he said. "I know," she said, with the serene matter-of-factness that was entirely hers. "I practiced." She looked at Elena. "Can we get food?" "We can get food," Elena said. "The good place?" "The good place," Elena confirmed. Lily took one of each of their hands, his right hand, Elena's left hand, and walked between them toward the gymnasium doors with the specific, decisive purpose of a child who had the meal she wanted and the people she wanted and was not interested in unnecessary delay. Outside, the spring afternoon was cool and bright, the kind of afternoon that doesn't ask anything of you but presence. They walked to the car. Lily talked about her notes and about the child beside her who had dropped her section of the presentation and how she had almost laughed but hadn't because she knew that would be wrong. She talked about the gymnasium lights being too bright and about whether the harbor workers would have thought it was strange to know that children were learning about them. She let go of their hands to get in the car. Damien stood with Elena on the sidewalk for a moment. She was looking at the street with the expression she wore when she was thinking about something she hadn't decided to say yet. He waited. "She hasn't called me Mom since she was 4, Elena said. "She decided it was unnecessary because I already knew who I was." A pause. "And then last week she used it, out of nowhere. We were making dinner and she said, 'Mom, the water is boiling,' and then continued stirring whatever she was stirring like she hadn't said anything that had any particular weight." "Maybe she decided it was accurate," Damien said. "Maybe," Elena said. "She makes her own calculations." "I know where she gets that." Elena looked at him, the expression that lived adjacent to a smile. "Both of us," she said. "She gets it from both of us." He looked at her, at the teal jacket and the loose hair and the specific quality of her face in afternoon light. The face that was not the face of 6 years ago, that was older and had been through more and was more precisely itself for having been through it. He looked at her the way you looked at something you had been careful not to look at directly for a very long time, and were now allowing yourself to see. "Elena," he said. "Don't," she said. Not harshly, just knowing. The way she had always known when he was about to say something large in the wrong way at the wrong moment. "Okay," he said. "Later," she said. "Okay," he said. She opened the car door. He walked around to the driver's side. Lily was already buckled, the rabbit in her lap. She had apparently produced it from her school bag, which he had learned 4 months ago simply to accept as one of the facts about his daughter. And she was looking out the window at the street with the alert attention of a child who found the world interesting. He started the car. The afternoon opened up in front of them. The spring street, the drive to the good place, the meal Lily had already planned in complete detail in her head, and would produce when the menu was placed in front of her as though she had just decided. The past behind them, documented and in the hands of people who would do the necessary things with it. The future not yet determined, not yet fully habitable, still under construction. He drove. The city moved around them the way it always moved, indifferent, mechanical, the lights cycling, the streets full of people going about the business of their lives. But inside the car there was warmth, and there was Lily's voice beginning to describe exactly what she planned to order and why. And there was Elena in the seat beside him, and the sound of her quiet laugh at something Lily said, low and real, the unperformed version that she kept for rooms where performance wasn't required. He listened to it. He drove toward the good place, and the afternoon light fell through the windshield, and the past was finally, at the weight and cost of everything it had taken to get here, exactly where it belonged. Behind them, answered for, laid to rest. The greatest empire Damien Moretti would ever build had no territory, no contracts, no men on east balconies calculating exits. It fit in one car on a spring afternoon, and it was driving toward dinner, and it was enough. It was, he understood, with the quiet, unglamorous certainty of a man who had dismantled everything false to find one true thing, entirely enough.